Alright, welcome ladies and gentlemen. My name is Corey LeBlanc. I am the ceremonial witch. Haven't been on here in a while to speak anyways. I've been uploading, re-uploading videos that I've felt are important to me, that I've used, that I watch, that I, most of them, that I put the links up for, that I've tried to put the links up for, are saved in my playlist on YouTube if you can't find them, or my history or whatever, liked videos. I'll try to very least hit the like button on all these videos so they're there if I don't actually put them in a playlist for you guys to watch if you're interested. And I know it might piss people off that I'm not coming on here and talking about magic, and I'm just putting up videos that, some people have probably already seen, and, you're listening to it above all. You're not even actually seeing the pictures. But in my honest opinion, hearing things is better than watching them, because your eyes can fucking fool you, and you could judge things by their appearance and all that. Same reason that a lot of places where I get my occult books, on certain pages they'll have pictures of nudity and offensive things, and that's to scare off people who aren't objectively thinking or depolarized, and they view it just by that. And that's a good way to scare off people. That's why a lot of these old fucking occult schools and places, witchcraft, all this has a dark connotation. I mean, I'm not gonna say that's the only reason, but it's to ward off the people that can't open their minds, that they see something and they just assume it's evil, and they have no idea, or it's baneful or sexual or taboo, whatever the case is. But anyways, the main reason for me putting these videos on and replaying them over and over again is because I know that I have people that aren't initiated into some of these things, and they're trying to do magic, and that's fine. Everybody's doing magic whether they know it or not, so everybody should have an understanding of magic. However, if you haven't gone down the road of realizing everything that history, his story, all this shit is bullshit, or is a version of truth, it isn't the actual version, it's someone's story that they put on there that we have accepted, and that you now need to decline and say, no, that's not the story. I want to know what the real story is. That's what I'm doing. Now, I always say, I oft say, like Birch talks, I often say that if you are, you have to go down this rabbit hole to start your initiation, open your bottom chakra. That is initiation to me into hermetics, into magic, into witchcraft, all this shit. You have to realize that everything you were taught was bullshit. Because until then, how are you actually going to find this stuff? If you just find a witchcraft book one day and start reading it, you're going to get so far. And as soon as it challenges your beliefs, your belief systems that are in you, then you're just going to put down the book and say, this is bullshit, even though up to that point you enjoyed it. And you're going to constantly think about that over and over in your head until at one point it's going to hit you. It's going to be like, wow, you know what? I got to pick up that book again because I just realized this shit's all fake. But anyways, you can't properly do initiation into magic without being depolarized or trying to. You don't have to be depolarized to start magic, but you have to be in the process of doing it. Is my opinion. You don't have to be 100% polarized, but that's the reason for the neophyte grade. Now, I'm entering the grade of air that I told everybody. I just recently finished the earth grade of the curriculum on the Kabbalah, the great work of self-transformation. And I'll be putting on tonight the last of that book if I haven't already done that. I don't even know anymore. It's been so long. But it's pretty sad that I can't even remember that. But anyways, but I'm still a neophyte. I'm always going to be a neophyte. I'm always going to be a beginner. I'm always going to be learning. That's the one thing I like about myself. I take pride in the fact that even before magic, I've always been objective. I've always had this non-judgmental attitude. Now, that being said, I'm not saying I wasn't judging people before this. I totally judged people all the time, but I was a lot better than most where it came to, people would just see somebody who was a drug addict or an asshole or whatever, and I would talk to everybody and give them the benefit of the doubt and let them speak their truth. Now, if when I spoke to them, I sometimes have judgments and I'd pass those judgments, and that I no longer do, but I was better than most, and that's something I really believe. But I forget where the fuck I was going with that. But that's the part of the depolarization. You can't pass judgments on anything. And there is one more video I'm going to play. It's a long one, but it's probably by far one of the best representations of actual history, war, cataclysms such as mud flood, and the research behind it is sound. And he might be a fellow Saturn in Libra, or Saturn in the 7th house, or someone with a strong Libra placement, because I feel that he's got a bit of a back and forth, whatever, but he discusses everything from the Civil War, the World Wars, mud flood cataclysms, great-tartaria, a whole bunch of things. Christ, before Christ, Common Era, so many things, and it's so amazing, so amazing. Even the star forts and all that, and the swastika, and how the swastika sign is still used, and it's actually a propeller. This is where I get a lot of my info, and the reason. And over the last few days, I've been putting on information that is fear-based media, but it's teaching something for the most part. Like I put on how to make promissory notes, but prior to that, I put on the information on how to go about getting rid of your certificate, putting in your death certificate and all that, getting rid of your SIN number, your license, and all that to do this process. So I put on fear-based media that talks about how we're being controlled, slavery, and birth certificate, and this and that. But I'm also trying, anyways, to give you the people that have apparently the remedy, okay? Because this is all I know. All I know is what I can do. And I can come on here and tell you guys this, but I haven't actually done it. So who the fuck would I be to come on here and tell you guys, yes, do this, do this, do this, when I haven't done it? I would just be a fake, like they talk on there, and I ain't no fucking fake. I'm not ever going to come on here and tell you something that I've never done personally. I'm going to give you what I know and where I got it from. And I put the links there so you can actually watch this shit, so you don't have to actually just listen to it. But sometimes listening to it first and then watching it, it's like, it's kind of the difference between, you read a book and then you watch the movie. It's not going to be as good as when you listen to it. And it's similar. It's not like reading a book. Reading a book, your imagination takes away, but same thing. You're hearing these words, you're hearing people's voices, you're putting faces to the voices, and you're imagining, what's going on, and then all of a sudden you see it, and it's not as grandiose. But the point is, you're going to comprehend it better. But I'm putting stuff on here I'm trying to be practical about it. But the main objective is to shove whoever hasn't been into an initiation, to shove them into that initiation, is the reason I'm putting this on here. It's for people to hear what is needed, what people need to know, what everybody around the world needs to know to get into this. So I'm putting it on the air, and YouTube keeps sending me copyright claims saying you stole this from who. I just ignore the shit, and something happens, I'll deal with it then. But you can't get stuck on it. You can't think it's the only truth and then stick your flag in and say, I ain't going anywhere until this is resolved, because you can take your whole lifetime and not get resolved. So there's no point in getting stuck on any of this stuff. Point is to learn it, use it to your benefit, take what you need out of it for your own personal life, and move on. The things you don't take might come up later, and you remember where to go and look at it, or send people to it. It has its purpose. But the purpose for me putting it on here is simply to get people to wake up, open their eyes, whatever the case is. Whoever hasn't already looked at this stuff, when they hear it, they might be intrigued. They may not. They might just shut it off, and that's okay too. Some people aren't ready for this info, but I don't think you can properly do magic or go down this road unless you've opened your eyes, unless you've realized these things. Now, all the stuff about the monetary system I put on there, and what I'm about to put on here today, and about the earth going back and forth, and these cycles and all that, is this all true? I don't know. It's the opposite side of polarity. They taught us one thing, and this is now the opposite of that, basically. So the truth is somewhere in the middle, and maybe even that's not true. There's no way to really know what happened back then. There's no way to know what's happening right now, to be honest, at this second, unless you witness it yourself somehow. And that's not witnessing somebody else saying, hey, I'm a whistleblower, and I'm here to break down the monetary system, and this is what's going on. That's just firsthand. It's just a witness testimony. That does stand up in court, but to me, it's just someone else coming out there with probably an agenda or some reason to try to fool people. But anyways, I wanted to come on here and give a little description of why I'm doing this and why I've been doing this. It isn't just to keep putting out shows because I'm not ready to talk yet. That's not true. I've been writing down shows this whole time, and I have a bunch of information. I still do want to go over the Enochian tablets that I put pictures on my website, the tablet of air, earth, water, fire, and all that. I want to specify how I use it and how I've been taught to use it. I want to talk about the watchers, the watchtower, all that. So I am still going to do an episode about that. There's a lot of things in the video I'm going to put on today that is up for guessing and up for tearing down, because he talks about the Civil War and being that the Southern, how Southern hospitality is and all that. How and on the video he actually shows pictures of the blacks and the whites that were in the Southern states fighting together against the North forces and all that, and how they were attacked at their homes, meaning they were invaded. And in my mind now, this is just what my mind gives me when I see stuff like this, and I'm not accepting it or declining it. I'm just telling you what I see. And to me, I was in the shower, and all came to me was like, well, that's what we did in World War I and II. We went over on that other island over there in Europe, over there in Asia, wherever you want to talk about. The only one thing was that Pearl Harbor in World War II got bombed, but besides that, all the action took over there, so that would make us the invaders once again. And yet we're claiming defense, and the Nazi Party has a swastika and all that, which is a propeller, which is still on a bunch of flags today, which he shows in this video. And that was the land. And anyways, the point is that whoever wins the war gets to write the story. They get to write the story they want. That's one of the things they're fighting for. When someone says, I'm going to fucking take your land, well, they know that if they lose, then they're going to get to say whatever the fuck they want and change the story, change it all around, which is why, the North wanted slavery. I'm not saying this is true or false. I'm just saying what he's putting out there. And he's not even saying an opinion or not. He gives you what he strongly thinks is his opinion, and his opinion is the North were the ones that actually liked slavery, and the South did not. Because it even shows the 13th Amendment actually doesn't abolish slavery. It actually gives you a definition of what slavery is. It didn't abolish shit. It actually created it. It talks about, how they were attacked in their homes and they were working with the blacks. And, he tells you to go watch the movie Gang of New Yorks and listen to the sentiment, how they treat the blacks and the Irish, and we all heard that, well, just because the Civil War was done doesn't mean that people were still against it. Even in the North, people thought slavery was okay. No. Anyways, I don't want to get into too much of that, because that is something that can never be proved. As I always say, you can't fucking prove any of this shit, to be honest. You can look at pictures. You can come to some pretty good guesses, suggestions, hypothesis, whatever, objections, and you can try to figure out what happened. But, if a picture is worth a million symbols and a symbol is worth a million words, well, point is, we can't prove none of this. And that's why when I put this stuff on, I'm trying to give you objective things. Now, this one's going to be very, very, very well done, to the point where, you're on the hook and you're ready to believe what he's saying. Because I know I did. And I've never resolved that. I never actually decided if great-tartaria was. I have a fucking map in my kitchen. It's part of a clock, and on it, it's an 18, or I forget the year. I want to say it's in 16 or 1700s. This map was quote unquote made. Who knows, right? That could have just been printed on after. But it says great-tartaria over there in the Asian, and a couple other Asia and a couple other parts of that continent, or closer to India, Egypt, Africa, all that. But it says it right on there. And one of the reasons I bought that was for that. And at that time, that's what I was researching. I thought, wow, what a synchronicity. They talk about the CHIS, and that's a people, that's a race. And their tool was the thing the Grim Reaper holds. Matter of fact, I got a tattoo of the Grim Reaper on the back of my leg. And when I was a kid, I got it for several reasons that I won't get into now. But it was very random, Who knows now, right? I got dark hair, but I got very white complexion skin, and I got green/blue/brown eyes. They're a big mixture, so I don't know what I am. And that's part of the history that people look into history. People that don't know their mother and father, they get caught up in the fact of, I don't know who I am because I don't know where I came from. And that's legit. To me, that's legit. I see my mom and dad, I know exactly where I get certain qualities and all that, And to me, if it's like, well, if I didn't know them, would it really bug me? And I can't prove that. I can go around saying, oh, why do you care? Why did it bug you? I wouldn't care. But I'm not in a position. I can't prove it if I would be able to or not. And it's the same thing that goes for all this. Like I said, I never resolved if I believe in this or not. But what I do know is it doesn't serve me to get stuck on it. It's fascinating to look at. I truly suggest maybe, depending on if you have money, you're not worrying about money and stuff like that. And yeah, looking at history, great-tartaria, mud floods, Max Egan. There's a bunch of good names I can put out there. But anyways, looking at these guys is great. You know, as a pastime, you get your mind off the magic you just performed and shit like that. That should be the goal. And if, you know, money is tight and all that, depending on if you're doing your magic on money, you may not want to be looking at all the money shit I put on there. But it's a great thing to look into, because if you can get off grid, if you can put in your certificate, get it notarized, if you can start making promissory notes to your bank and all that by doing the process correctly and looking into this, then yeah, 100% you should do it. I want to do it. I'm going to try doing it. I'm going to try to contact all the people that Santos Bonacci named. The girl I put on here, Irene Gavin Horse, I can't really pronounce her name, I think it's Gavin Horse. I want to contact her and I want to take her fucking course. No word of a lie. I think I might, and if I do, I'm going to talk to you guys about it. Now, I'm not going to give away your secrets, because that wouldn't be right. But I'll tell you guys what's going on and what the process is. And I also want to contact Mark Hollywood or Mark Simser. He says on one of the videos to Skype him and all that. So I'm still trying to find his number. I don't have Facebook per se, but I went on my wife's Facebook and I added Santos and I added him. And see if I can strike up a conversation to get that number. And when I do, I'm going to report it to you. Like I said, if these people charge for their services to get this done, then I'm not going to come out here and spill the beans to the world or anything like that. That's 100% not going to happen. But the things I can help you do or guide you to or whatever and let you know if it works or not before you go spend your money, I'll be the guinea pig for that, and I want to report on it, because I truly believe that it's something we all need to do. If we're all going to sit around complaining about the monetary system, that we're all slaves, but yet we're not going to do this research and we're not going to follow through with it, then we're no better than any other hypocrite there is in the world. We're just sitting around complaining and not doing a fucking thing about it. You know, if you're going to complain about politicians and you're going to complain about the world and the state and all this crap, the bankers, you know, then you don't actually do this. Well, and you stay in that system, provoking it and actually fueling it and giving them more money, then yeah, you're just being a hypocrite. And if you don't know this information, well then okay, you're not a hypocrite yet, because you don't know how to fight it. You're still looking for that. I mean, if you're not actively looking for it, well, then you kind of are a hypocrite. But if you're actively looking for a solution and you haven't found this yet, well, then that's fine, you know? But if you found this information, you know this, and you're just, no, that's too sketchy, I don't want to try, I don't want to go down. Well, then stop fucking complaining then. You either got to start the process or stop the complaining. One of the two, but stop being a hypocrite. Do one or the other. You either got to say, you know what, I'm in this system, I'm going to stick it out, see where it goes. Or, no, I'm going to fucking fight it and get off this fucking high horse and stop fucking complaining about it. One or the other. Simple as that. But anyways, there's more things I want to talk about, but it's about an hour and a half long. It's fucking long, okay? I'm sorry, but I'm giving you fair warning, so if you don't want to turn it off, if you want to turn it off now, and I'm going to come back on for the remainder of the time. Let's see, I spoke here for... so far, about 20 minutes or so? I don't even know. My fucking computer's screensaver's on, which is cool, but I have a whole slew of things I want to talk about. 20 minutes, man. 19 and 15 seconds, it's pretty cool. I'm good at that kind of thing. I have a whole list of things that pertains to the fear-based knowledge stuff that I put out for y'all, but as correspondences to magic and how to use different of these things in magic, you know. I put that one video out where Santos was talking about that guy, where Mind and Magic actually had a video of that same guy he's talking about, which I thought was pretty cool. But the point was that he was talking about using the name, naming a thing, something that you name, it doesn't exist, so then don't expect your magic to work, right? And likewise, if you're trying to heal something, but you're being very vague, or you have identified the wrong problem because you didn't go to a doctor or a professional to figure out what the real problem is, well then don't blame the magic either. But there's a lot of different correspondences out there that you can. I mean, this video, the guy even talks about sigils, talks about Rosicrucianism, talks about a whole bunch of things. And it all correlates. It's pretty cool like that. But the reason I put this kind of information out when I'm putting fear-based stuff out, and you know, I feel like a hypocrite too, because I said I put an episode a long time ago saying the only controversial or only conspiratorial episode I'll ever do and this isn't conspiracy, because to me, well, I mean, it's conspiracy, yeah, especially Mud Flood, Great-Tartaria and all that. That was pretty popular for a while. I don't even know what's popular out there because I don't watch this shit. I managed to get out, but I did have to probably go through this to open that chakra properly. I mean, I kept just going from one topic to the next topic, and then when I found a topic, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. The reason I prayed that great braiding thing yesterday, because he went through those stages, and those stages are key for anything, for your magic, for your sickness, your health, your money situations, your everything. It's all like that. Whatever you're doing, you're going to figure out the problem. You're going to go from fucking topic to topic in a good mood, thinking you're going to fix the problem, and then you're going to get into that overwhelmed state. Anyways, but I put this kind of stuff on because it's not going to kill you. And what I mean by that is if you're watching chemtrails, if you're watching fluoride, if you're watching the GMO shit, if you're watching shit about radiation, all right, if this is the fear-based media you're watching, you're going to kill yourself if you put emotion into what you're looking at and you think it's fucking real. So don't watch that kind of fear-based media. Yes, it's important to know. Yes, it's important to know what to stay away from. But you can do that. You can figure those things out without having to watch 170 videos of how fluoride is killing your pineal gland. If you watch a video that says, calcify your third eye, calcify your third eye, calcify your third eye. How to decalcify your third eye, how to decalcify your third eye. All that's doing is telling your brain that your third eye is calcified. That's it. That's what that's doing. By reading that and watching that. Yes, they're giving you hints and tips on how to do it, but NLP, analog marking, they do it in a specific way. You got to watch that shit. And I don't mean by you have to look at that shit. I mean, you got to watch out for that shit. That's what I meant by that. Now, if you watch something about the third eye, of the processes, how to open it up, what entails in it, and all that, I put on a Christos video by Santos Panacci a while ago on a little bit of explaining how that keeps happening. There's also techniques you got to do when you breathe through your nose by putting your tongue up to the top of your mouth, which also opens up something there, which I'm going to probably play for you at some point. I don't know when. That's more yogi, science of breath stuff. Has to do with Jesus, but Jesus being a yogi and not the Son of God and all that shit. But that's a story for another time. But anyways, that's why I put this kind of stuff on there, because the monetary system, shit like that, yeah, okay, watching too much fear-based media about money will make you broke. Yeah, if you start thinking about money the wrong way, you start thinking money doesn't exist, and blah, 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 yeah, well, in your mind, you're going to think, well, I don't want to be evil like these guys, so I better not, I'm never going to have money. That's what this stuff does. I'm not telling you this is good fear-based media to watch, and it has no effects. Definitely has effects, has profound effects on you. If you're watching all these things about money, then yeah, you're going to make yourself not want money. You're going to make your subconscious push money away so you don't become an evil entity or a corporation or a corporate asshole or someone who's killing people for money. But at least he's not killing your body. And you can always reverse this later. It's just the better out of the two evils, would be my opinion. But anyways, I'm going to get to it now, and I'm going to come back on after. I'm going to have about an hour to talk, since it only talked about for about 24 minutes now. So, and I promise 100% I'm coming on after, and I'm speaking this time. I know I say that, and I never do it, but I already told my wife I have to, and it doesn't matter what we're doing, I got to drop it. And since I'm starting now, that means I'm going to have to come on at, I don't know, it's 1:49, so you had an hour and a half to that. Anyways, I'll be on about 3:30, something like that. All right, have a good one, guys. Hope you enjoy.
It was... So, to review, we've been talking about a planet-wide apocalyptic disaster, which caused a great mud flood that then destroyed a worldwide empire that then went through a giant reset. I'm calling it STEM punk for like science, technology, algebra, engineering, mathematics. It was not a renaissance, but a reset. History was hidden and erased in order to hide what had happened. The empire was rebranded to hide, and it wasn't rebuilt. It was here all along. Some of it was demolished even. So, let's get into the economy of Tartaria, because what's sort of interesting is this idea that it was an international agreement across many nations, including American Indians, who, by the way, were a confederacy. And when I say confederacy, you kind of intuitively know that they had chieftains, but they were literally part of the Confederacy, fought on the South, and kept slaves themselves. So it's an interesting part that we'll get into. So before we get too far in, I just want to talk about taking all of these ideas and tying them together. The first thing you're going to want to do is take all the ideas that you have and just put them away for a minute. It doesn't mean you have to forget them, but you're going to just want to put them in another place.
That's awesome.
And the best way to do that is to figure out what you know is been taught to you, and then what you can perceive about it with your senses, and replace your preconceptions with your senses. And then I want you to think about all of these things that you've heard and seen and felt and tasted and smelled even, and empathized with and been aware of. So part of the series we'll be looking at the difference between truth and hidden meaning. So you might wonder, what's the point of studying history? Because you know already that history is not true about the subject, which it is lying. However, lies invariably are about truth. So we could study these lies and find the deeper meanings. So we're going to look at things like symbols and words, particularly ones that mean pejoratives or negatives, that actually have positive connotations. Primitive is a great example. We're told that the people that lived long ago were primitive. But when we think about this word, primitive, primal, primordial, prime, comes out. And we know prime root really means prime radical. So it's more likely that they were quite civilized, actually, and that they're hiding something. So we're going to get into what sort of a society that they had constructed. Historically, a lot of social contract theory comes to the Magna Carta, although Cyrus's Cylinder of Columbus Day 539 BC technically is perhaps more important. The important thing about that also is before Christ. I know we want to say common, but there's a lot of reasons why we should talk about what that word really means. Christ and Messiah mean anointed one, which refer to the Exodus oil made of cannabis that the Therapeutica used to anoint each other during the times of Gnostic Occidental mysticism. So it's interesting that they haven't changed the calendar. They've just sort of changed its name. I mean, go ahead, use another calendar. I did for a long time. Switch to the Mayan long count. It's a great calendar. Just write it on your hand every day. But if we're going to use BCE and CE, I think we should describe it differently as before the collapse era and the communist era, which really makes a lot of sense to take the common era and to use iconoclasm to steal the work, change the names, and present some sort of a false history. Anyway, so this idea that the Magna Carta was signed under duress by a tyrannical king who was unfair, an absolute monarch, foolish, and considered ugly, and then the people were saved and their rights were restored to them. This is a false legacy. What really happened is nothing like this. And the reason we know that is because the story tells you about a king who was forced to sign a contract. An agreement must be voluntary. Any forced involuntary contract is essentially non-legally binding. There are exceptions to this rule, of course, but in general, the idea is to know what you have participantly signed a contract of and what the rules are. So let's look at this history slightly differently. King John Plantagenet, who, yes, looks not so ugly, in fact, looks a lot like Christ, was threatened upon signature with death if he did not sign, which is sort of an interesting metaphor for our social contracts that we keep to this day. And it is an important thing to remember that efficiency of breach is used to this day. So every contract has a clause, including a Magna Carta. And every contract is based on some sort of uniform commercial code. You can make a contract of your own, but if you don't, it's often assumed that you're using the Uniform Commercial Code. And in the Uniform Commercial Code, it is written that when you accept a benefit, you are obligated to accept the obligations and duties of that contract. For instance, if you eat a fruit in a store, you're expected to pay the price. And these are the agreements that we live for. It's part of relationships, which is a form of symbiosis. And there's many kinds of symbiosis, but essentially the concept is that the union gives strength. There's not just positive or negative symbiosis, but in general, symbiosis makes it possible for many different things to work together to become a larger thing. Sort of like the Siphonospora, which is a jellyfish order, actually comprised of 188 species of jellyfish, which could not live independently, but together create an inseparable duo, the body politic. And the human is in fact a body politic as well. This is why we use this term. We are a sea of many species, and the union brings us together into a form of hierarchy, and that complexity of specialization requires us to have a symbiosis. So there are types of symbiosis. Commensalism is a type of symbiosis where neither one is affected. Parasitic symbiosis is where one takes from the other and the other loses in the relationship. And there are a lot of parasitic relationships around us. And the parasites produce offspring which continue to create new relationships and to live off of the larger organism. Parasites that practice lecherous occult and the destruction of our society in order to benefit themselves, to empower themselves, and to take away what little we have because they do not produce enough for themselves. And while they may think that it often is beneficial or at least commensal, it's often not. It's often parasitic. So a great relationship would be an example, a non-parasitic relationship would be an example of the wolf and the raven. And it's a relationship that goes back in the arts thousands of years. Into the Indo-Aryan times, there was a relationship between the Vikings and the tribes of the Scythians, and they created a trading empire, which allowed for nomadic persons to meet, and citizens to meet in cities. And this allowed for an expansive empire that had diversity of race and religion. So often, when people on the internet now are worried about the past, they say, Africa or Egypt or North America or Asia, sort of exclusively, but we know that we were all connected at one point, and that there was some sort of symbiosis. So, looking around the planet, there are the ruins of all of these great civilizations. There's these temples everywhere, and there are words and symbols which have been obscured but still leave remnants. For instance, Tartarian has the Torah and Aryan in the title. Also, in the etymology, we're looking at words like territory, tariff, trade, barter, tartan. And just using your vocabulary, you can find a lot of words that are rooted in Tartary. And Sanskrit is a great clue for this, because of all the Indo-Aryan languages that are rooted in Sanskrit, we'll find that Hindu languages like Hindi and Germanic languages like German itself have very similar words and terms and alphabets. For instance, in Sanskrit, Mama Mama means my name is, where mein Namen is, my name in German. So it's spread very clearly, and then you can see the differences in pronunciations. For instance, in Spanish, do you like bands? If you like the shoes, the Vans, I remember hearing, because B and V and D and T can often be exchanged. And spelling does matter in ways, because you'd rather be on a desert island with dessert. It also affects the way people speak depending on where they're from. This is how we know about the lisp of the Catalan accent in Barcelona, Spain, because the royal family. But it's not that confusing to see how they were able to spread this language so far. When you look at the planet from a northern projection of the pole, you can see how close these places really are to each other, especially with boats. So carrying this culture across North America, Eurasia, would have been a fast path. And we can see the records of Phoenician letters and Etruscan letters and the Roman, and we see how they came even from Sumerian, from the Tartary. So Kemet, which is one of the oldest records of African culture, it shows this as well. And while it is very clearly a African empire, worships, like the rest of the empires, something greater than themselves. So I'm not going to say it's, extraterrestrial, but there is some sort of sacred geometry that's worth noting. And I think that this is a good subject on itself that is worth looking into. I recommend videos by Scott Onstott on the subject. Probably the best word to describe Secrets in Plain Sight series on the sacred geometry of reality. The word is definitive. It's just nothing I've found more. I would say you should buy his books. They're fantastic. I'm highly recommending his series. So, the history of the symbols of the Tartarian Empire are built into its structure. There were star forts across the land and sea. There were players in this game that was an economy. And there was a banker system that brought things back and forth in a self-propelled civilization, which saw technology as worship. And this explains why they worship the propeller so much. And I know this is kind of a scary subject for some people, but really, it's even if it's been forbidden because you think it's a symbol of hate, please remember that all talismans have whatever meanings you project on them. Context is everything, and it's a really bad idea to put negative energy into a symbol. I mean, that's just a tip that I would recommend. And in general, if you're going to give up the propeller, you might as well give up carrots and spinach and animal rights too, because they're all inextricably linked by identity politics, if you really feel that way. And a better thing to do would probably be to dismantle the hate and find the true root of these symbols. Of course, that's totally up to you if you want to give up propellers and vegetables. But an example of some people that do love the propeller and are not evil, as far as I can tell, are the Jains, who are a pacifist Hindu cult that goes back many millennia. It's a religion that does not harm, it won't even harm a tuber, won't kill potatoes, won't eat roots from under the earth, will explicitly choose to eat vegetables, blossoms, and not kill the vegetables themselves. It's such an interesting religion, and definitely not one that is associated with hate or murder or supremacy, unless it's the supreme divine individual spirit. But this also shows us that there's this great, colorful culture that spanned the world, and that it believed in this self-generating, living fractal system, and that these symbols were lucky, and that they were powerful, and not just powerful in an esoteric or an engineering sense, but those two are essentially the same thing. And so it makes all of a sudden so much sense why these two symbols are so inextricably linked, the star fort and the propeller swastika, because without them, they could not get from one to the other, and they could not defend the other with the other. But we're told that these are evil because they're old, and we've gone through an era of iconoclasm, destroying maps, destroying symbols, taking and replacing, often rebranding when possible. A great example, of course, is the symbol of fasces, which is a number of rods bundled together with an axe head at the top. And what is an axe head, right? It's a tool, very clearly a tool. It's not a weapon. It could be a weapon, but it's not. It's a tool that could be used to defend, but it's mainly a beautiful, elegant tool that can be used to craft, to build houses, to make fires, to defend, but mainly it's a tool. So it's an interesting symbol that they use to represent fasces as a number of fragile reeds that are together stronger when attached. And it's destroyed everywhere we go. They tear it down. They don't want you to see it. And it's not just ISIS that's destroying these icons. And it's not just in Europe or in Asia. Across the world, we're destroying everything we have of the past, whether it was about something good or not. It's being justified as if it's for this better future. So, a people that have a lot of imagery that somehow hasn't survived are the Slavs, and it's not the same as the Soviets that you have seen so much of. The Soviet Union architecture is very specific, but in old country, there was a lot of beautiful structures. There was essentially the fairy tale folk cottage style that we think of from art books, but real. And these are some examples mainly of the inexpensive cottages, these wooden houses and cottages and churches that survived or were somehow, documented. But these are just the inexpensive, comparably to the large castles that existed. And we'll see peacock feathers and notice tattoos of sacred geometrical patterns and see that the Slavonic people were a great and cultured people, colorful, diverse, and part of the Tartarian Empire, along with the Scythians. The Scythians are a people that are remembered through the scythe today, which was their tool for harvesting. It's also considered the root for the Sith, which is an interesting connection to the Bene Gesserit from Dune that Star Wars had manipulated into sort of a Disneyfied version. They're connected to the Aryans who had boats and long houses. Now, I know when you say Aryans, but really, yeah, it's okay to be Aryan. The Indo-Aryans are a group that they rose out of Mesopotamia and eventually went around the world, and they're known for their boats, which they have in Eritrea and they have in the Viking world. But is it not unlikely that they were just part of this greater empire that we now know existed in the same places that they traveled? And you see the examples of tribes which look like mixed between Scandinavians and Scythians or Asians. And it starts to make sense why there are so many diverse races in the last 500 to 1,000 years because of traveling by sea, even though the origin myth really described there being many less races, in fact. And so looking at the longhouses of the Pacific West coast, like the North Americans, we can see that there is some truth to the official history that this Leif Erikson character had come from Scandinavia through Greenland to Vinland and discovered the New World, at some point making arrangements for trade with the Scythians, and that they stayed and created a cultural exchange that has lasted. And you might say that it could just be intuitively logical, they look the same, but I think the more you look at it, the more you see the specificity of their designs from this Malaysian, Indo-Aryan, American trade. And so we have reasons to believe that it's not just a land-locked continent like Gondwana or Pangaea or an ice bridge, but actually boats in interaction. But any of these solutions will describe why we have these noble savages, as they were called, who were cultured, civilized, and also, in some cases, clearly more Asiatic or more Scandinavian than others, including the Han tribe of Canada. So, the Han, the Asian, the Chinese, let's talk about the Chinese first, because those are all different things. And before we get into the Chinese, let's talk about origin models for nations. So, I use the trapezoid scheme, and the way I look at it is usually a foreign king invades, not with his own sons, but often with conscripted soldiers from another defeated nation. And they're then forced to defeat the enemies of the king, which exhaust the defeated empire and continually exhaust the undefeated empire into defeat. When the nation is defeated, they're conscripted, they're enslaved, they're culturally erased, and they are assimilated into a working class or a soldier class, like the formerly defeated that helped defeat, for the king, the new nation. And this perpetuates colonialism and also the culture through a system called kyriarchy. And kyriarchy is a system of cross-sectional polarizations that are used to isolate and to antagonize different groups of people into submission to a larger system. So you might consider yourself male or female, but you might be black or white, or you might be Republican or liberal. And each one of these cross-sections puts you in a smaller and smaller group where you have less and less advocates from the rest of the identity politic. So, using the system, it puts the upper class at the top and the slave class at the bottom, and gives a certain amount of leeway to the middle class, so long as they encourage the lower class to behave and are discouraged by the lower class from misbehaving. And this also translates to an essentiality for concern, because your capacity for concern is dependent on your ability to take care of your fundamental physiological needs, your safety, your love, and self-esteem, before you can reach self-actualization. So it essentially licenses self-actualization for the elite and takes it away as an option for the poorer classes. And it's a repeatable experiment. You can see this all over the world, in India, with the caste system, in the serfs of Europe, which had a religion at the top, incidentally similar to the Brahmin priesthood above the princes, and in Latin American society as well. And another interesting thing about this model is it shows that the foreign king is at the top, and the conscripted soldiers are in the middle, and the defeated nation is always, always, always at the bottom. And so, looking at the Latin Americans, of course, you have the peninsulars at the top, and their mixed race slightly underneath them. The Africans, who have been brought in to slave, are above the indigenous. And that's not the only place you're going to find that. You look into India, the Indo-Aryans at the top are not the natives, the untouchables are. And there's plenty of statistical evidence to show, and etymological and linguistic evidence to show that this is the case. Ask a Tamil. But looking into Europe, it's very, very similar. It's not that Europe was ever really run by Europeans, as far as we can tell. England was a Roman Britannic state for a very long time, full of slaves, and it is to this day run by the Wilhelm House of Windsor, which is their British English version of their name Wilhelm, but they're not hiding it very well. I mean, King George III couldn't speak English during the American Revolution, which I'm sure made it easier for the Masons to manipulate independence and anti-disestablishmentarianism. But he wasn't the first king either. It's not that the German line is the first. I mean, William the Conqueror, a Norman, could not speak English either. For 300 years, his line did not. So this is where we get back into who is China. Because if England is in English, and South America is in South American, and India isn't run by the Indians, I doubt China is either. And there's 56 ethnic minorities that are listed, not counting the ones that are completely eradicated or in the process of being so. And they're fascinating, interesting people with great cultures. For instance, the Hmong people, who have some of the most fantastic magic that's still practicable to this day. And very, very much notice the peacock on her shirt as well. It's the peacock you will find again and again. The Yi people, fantastically different designed clothes. And yeah, sure, she looks Chinese. The Sake people look pretty Chinese in this picture, but do their clothes. And that's a good example of the hidden culture. The Tibetans. There are remnants of conquered peoples in these Chinese. You've seen them become Chinified, but you've not seen them become Chinese. Ethnic cleansing does not fully work. And I know this is a subject that China is trying to say is, at the very least, not to be talked about, whether or not it's true. But I would say that whether or not it's impolite, the evidence is honorable, that their homes have been occupied and their culture has been erased. And I think it's also important to watch the film Hero, if you ever have the chance, which is a Jet Li film, propaganda film from China that was released in the United States by Quentin Tarantino.
Battery low.
Chinese occupying the Chinese lands, and then I should go back to that. I'm sorry, we'll go back to this point. But basically, in China, there was a rain of arrows and a burning of all the books and the destruction of all the culture. And the question is asked, if all of history was erased and only one single symbol from your culture could be saved, which symbol would you save? And this is like, these are the sad feels I get. Like, honestly, I can't help but feel for iconoclasm. That's something that really gets me. I think about the hidden Christians of Japan that were unable to admit what they believed for hundreds of years under threat of being crucified upside down. So we'll get back into that. Let me go a little bit further back, though, because I skipped forward to talk about that movie. So, how do you murder a mandala? I mean, here's an example of a suppressed culture in China. It's Tibet. And Tibet is well known for being civilized and occultic, esoteric. They make fantastic mandalas out of sand, paint, and then wipe them away. So it seems kind of like the hardest culture to really erase, and the one that gives so much hope. Because sure, they can rape and murder, and they can move in a bunch of Chinese to Tibet, but no matter how hard they try to conquer Tibet, and to make Tibet China will never be Tibet. It can never be Tibet. Tibet is just too fantastical. It's too magical. It's too sophisticated. And I don't mean to take those words and say that they're exclusive to Tibet, as China has a fantastical, magical culture of its own. But it isn't. It is separate, and it is different. So there's also the connections between Tibet and Egypt, which are the Book of the Dead. It's not the only Book of the Dead. And the beliefs in chaos and order and Saturn and the moon, there's enough evidence to show a West Coast connection between the same Shintoism of Japan and the Book of the Dead of Tibet and the Book of the Dead of Egypt and the Book of the Dead and the Day of the Dead in Mexico. So, the next thing we were talking about, the hidden Christians of Japan, where Japan had believed Jesus had actually been. Then there was a giant war, which ended up in the destruction of the Japanese Christians and the hiding of the Christians. The old ways are remembered. Anyway, these are allegedly the real Chinese. But I have to ask, if a rape culture is the product of rape, is rape culture really your culture? So, here's a non-Han Chinese origin story. There's another China. And it's worth knowing that China. So, in Shin's land, these are the Chinese conquering invaders. This is the Great Wall to keep out China. These are the Han that got into the wall. Officially, they're supposed to be Chinese. But I would say the Uyghurs are not just another ethnic group. They're supposedly Turkish looking, but this is because the last of them that are allowed to be considered their own people live in Turkey. Still, these people live in China to this day, and they are Chinese. And it makes you think about indigenous people and their cultures being taken from them, and their lands being taken from them, and their assimilation through rape. And the Chinification, this is the conscripted soldier, and this is the outcome. And it's repeated again throughout history. Here's an example of a Mongolian now dressed as a Soviet soldier right before the greatest tragedy of World War II, arguably, was the Lost Women of 1945, where so many women and children between the ages of 13 and 80 were raped. An entire race created. And it's something that we're told we know happened, but somehow we're supposed to be justifying it because the Germans did bad things during the war too, or at least their husbands did. So, the men were bad, so we should rape their women and their children. Although I'll ask you to find some evidence that's neither cartoon nor Hollywood, because
I think a mob will probably have a hard time doing that. It's a lot easier to be vindictive than to think about the qualities of a situation. But I have to ask, was this really the right way to do it? Because if you're not being fair, you'll end up having to pay the bill later. So, these are the conscripted soldiers. Where were they from? Well, the Koreans are called the Han, and this makes a bit of sense, because the Koreans are a people, very great people, very magical people, a very rich culture that worship the moon and the portal, and have been divided, oppressed, yet have been always unified regardless of this effort that's been put upon them. And they worship the two pillars, they have the sun and the moon dynamics, and while they are proudly not Chinese, they maintain very many Chinese artifacts in their culture. So is it possible that these are Korean artifacts and they are not Chinese in origin? We consider many Japanese things to be Chinese in origin. Could it be that these Chinese things are Korean? Another movie to watch that's interesting, from Korea, 2009, Lost Memories, which is an alternative timeline that shows what would happen if the Japanese had never lost their control of Korea in World War II. And it's definitely an interesting story. But it could very well be that there's an effort just to confuse us about history, and that Marco Polo was right all along, and that, in fact, Chinese were not Chinese, but Persian before the Han, before the building of the wall in the Great War in the 1600s. So Marco Polo, who was from Cruiser, Croatia, which is a giant white stone castle island in the middle of the Balkans, was known for traveling to China. And he arrived back in Europe and was imprisoned right before the beginning of a great European war. And his stories were dictated in prison about his travels through the Tartary and into China, where he eventually met Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan is, until recently, not depicted as a Chinaman. He's never a Han. He's always a redhead. And in the old days, we used to think it was kind of strange that they would put John Wayne as Genghis Khan, but now I have to think it's just part of the tradition. And Marco Polo probably wasn't wrong about that. There's so many things that we're told Marco Polo was correct about, but we're supposed to believe these things that were incorrect were just such huge misconceptions that we would miss them. It seems unlikely. It's more likely that we're wrong about so many things in history because we saw the Netflix version. However, it's possible that so many of these races have been changed in order to obscure the importance of them and to show that the Caucasian is some sort of elite, singular race, but I kind of think not. I think it makes more sense that there's just a grand economy that shares in the spoils with all of the nations. However, China from Persia, Persians from China, the Parthian era, the redhead Iranian Persian Chinese. There's a lot of evidence to show. Before we get any deeper into history, I would like to address oppositional pathology and the esoteric sciences, because a lot of what we're talking about is what we see, and the thing about what we see often is how we see it defines what it is. And this a lot of the time comes around the esoteric concepts of archetypes, and Carl Jung and Man and His Symbols, which was a book that Carl Jung wrote that basically describes the idea that without God to illuminate our symbols, man is in darkness, and with those symbols we are able to reflect upon ourselves. It's actually, the Sanskrit word guru means to come out of darkness into light. And generally we have this concept of experts, and the word experts comes from experimenters who have navigated the path and have found their way out of the labyrinth, or at least have led us to the end results that they have found, which are the walls, the brick walls that they've not been able to escape. But if you look closer yourself and experiment, sometimes there are ways out of these walls, and these brick walls are actually just doors, and the keys to the buried treasure that are being guarded actually help us escape this system that we've been entrapped in for so long. It's because perspective and hubris is our perception, and it's a lens that we can share. And it usually starts like this. In the beginning, there's lots of bright, interesting energy, and we break it down. Patterns start to emerge. Often, and usually, we are taught which identities of patterns to notice from people that we trust. And when we start to see them open up, logos begin to form at what we call the delta point. And when the logos enter the psyche, then they became relationships in our youth. And we call this point the developmental psychology. Like, psychology is just the measurement of the symbols and the metrics in our minds and their use. In school, we're supposed to trust our leaders and our educators to teach us how to think and what behaviors are acceptable. And we're supposed to know that they're reliable sources. But if it turns out they're not, then we're supposed to rely on our own experiments in order that we don't become skewed and lose all credibility and faith in something greater than the heretics who've misrepresented and betrayed us and the subject itself that they have lied about. So we'll talk about chemistry later, but I want to introduce this quote from Yale chemist Professor Michael McBride. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts, right? And again, experts are experimenters. So science is more than just existential allegory. It's experimentation. Very, very much so. It's important that you be able to test something yourself. And at a point when people tell you that they are so well versed in experimentation that you don't need to or that you can't experiment and try these experiments and become an expertise yourself, that might be, for lack of a better conspiracy, just because of conformational bias, is what I call it. Because they want you to confirm and then conform both yourself and others to an agenda-shifting pattern. And this is what scientists are taught to believe from a very early age is acceptable, because they know once they reach the point of no return that beyond the Socratic method of deductions that can be made through perceptions, and that there's only a range of consistent predictability. And beyond that range is the philosophy of empiricism and empirical observations, which is essentially a cult of perception. And while observances can be made, they can be augmented and are not trustworthy. So science falls into a philosophy of trust in illusions and a distrust in your own observations, which scientists have already been well informed that there are many ways to see things, and that right and wrong are merely points of view, and truth ranges between the pillars of falsity. So it's more important to see the bigger picture. And skeptics emerge and might say, in some predictable responses to scientists' predictable responses, I have seen, or I have read, or I have experimented, or at least my parents got me for Christmas that book on how things work. And the greatest threat to this conspiracy is someone getting their child a crystal radio kit and then putting it together and learning how things work, and then saying that they can see right through it, that they see a system, and in that system they find that there is a code, and it's been encoded. And this is actually where we get the word encoded, or coding, or coders, or programmers, because of tapestries, which were encoded with programs by code weavers, such as Penelope. So another way of looking at things is to say that these are some sort of intellectual fights that are happening for the sake of teaching us how we're supposed to view another perspective. And it's true that we can learn and wrestle with each other's perspectives, or you can be forced to see things a certain way. But if at some point someone tells you to see things that you have not been taught to see, or rather you've been taught not to see, it might seem less believable or hard to handle the truth beyond that range of acceptable belief and perception. This is where we get into this field of Gestalt psychology. And Gestalt is a German word which represents form or shape and perspective of that shape, because there are many ways to look at many shapes, and they're not all wrong. Some of them might not be better than others, but some might be better than others, depending on your values and your needs. So it is everyone's prerogative to try to see things their own way, at least just be able to see them differently and to find the way that is best to see them. And it's often we avoid that perception because we want to keep this rigid paradigm that is safe. But is it really? And where do we get it, right? It's usually something that starts the same way. We are to distrust ourselves. We are to believe we are worth less than ourselves. We are then to trust in these others who are, we believe, better than us and know more than us, because they've gone further in the labyrinth than we have, so we must trust them. So we make an arrangement and an agreement, and imprinting begins, and some sort of perception or perspective or philosophy is imprinted into you forever, and it's hard to remove, and it defines and shapes your pathology and your cognition forever. And it leads to what I call hypnotic reactionaries, where sort of like after MK Ultra, where Nazi scientists had pioneered mind control, and granted it was an end game of mind control, but what was it really? It was the study of oppositional defiance. It then led to the ability to control the minds through mass hypnosis, which Open Sesame in the young times of the 60s led to an entire society that believed that they had somehow created or discovered a truth that was their own. And Ginsburg had told them that the electric Kool-Aid acid test and their bus was just a CIA catch and tag and release program. While he wasn't believed, eventually the Freedom of Information Act did prove that that was the case. So there are many examples of important philosophers that wrestled with these subjects using their own senses. However, they did start with education. Ram Dass, of course, very Ivy League. So it can be questioned, were these found or were they revealed? Also, I felt it important to mention the Grateful Dead. So many people seem to love the Grateful Dead, who used to be called the Warlocks, but they are part of the information campaign led by the American CIA in the 60s. So, if you were to not follow your programming, if someone were to tell you that you had been part of MK Ultra or some related information, you were supposed to go insane, go rogue, and a self-destruct sequence would initiate. And there have been examples of agents going rogue and suiciding through bulletproof glass, which should be impossible, but shows what is possible with the mind. And there's a lot of hypnotic reactionaries to this day. You see them every day, everywhere you go, because of the media. And they respond on a level to vibrations and waves that are, they precede the understanding of what it is they're upset about. They're simply upset at a level that is hormonal and perhaps radio. But this kind of training creates an entire class of non-playing characters who believe that they are the most diverse, and perhaps this is a perfect word, diversity, because it is the duoverse, the two, unanimity minus one. And if you take any the quickest way to divide it, or the easiest way, is into two. Before you divide it into any more, you would divide it into two. There's this concept of I and thou, which was part of Martin Buber's philosophy, of binary meta philosophy, of unanimity minus one. It is very diametric, very binary, very digital, very oppositional, and supportive at the same time. But it is not analog. It is not spectral. It is you ain't. So, how many senses do you have? You might think 6 senses, right? Or 5 senses. But if you start to think about it, smelling and tasting and feeling, well, even eardrums and eye photonics are all sort of touch-based senses. And if you really think about that, you have one sense, that you're sort of this seeing amoeba that is describing different ways of feeling. Remember that electrostatic means that you really can't touch anything, and you probably are making it all up. So you have no sense at all. But we may share one sense. I mean, it's the concept of empathy. The sixth sense, awareness of how others feel, or how an understanding of how others and what others feel. And if you focus on that spiritual sense, you can discover and tune your other senses to better describe a more consistent, predictable reality. Last time we were talking about Marco Polo and his trip across Tartarian Europe, Asia, into the Chinese Empire of Persians, which was Indo-Aryan, and the indigenous Uyghur people whom had been displaced by the Han, who come from the lands of Korea. And so let's get into what Marco Polo said about China. At the time, China was considered a Persian empire that was controlled by Genghis Khan. It was referred to as Kitay, or Kitaya, or Kitayo. Xin is the name of the emperor, which we derived the name China. At the time, the empires that surrounded Persia were the Ukrainian Cossack Empire, the Poles, the Byzantine Empire, the Bulgarians. Below Persians, there were the Mesopotamians. But in the center is an empire that is essentially remembered only through being conquered by the name of Khazaria. And Khazaria was a noble class of grand viziers, often were involved in the trading and the intellect of the other cities, including, this is perhaps where Byzantine got its name. But the Battle of Kiev, which is detailed in the story of Taurus Bulba, is about the Cossacks, whom Taurus Bulba is the chief of, and the Polacks, whom the Poles at the time were in cooperation to defeat the Ottoman Turks. So they had a pejorative. It was believed that the Cossacks were called Tartarians and then called Cossacks when they were no longer Tartarians, as long as they were working with the empire. They were considered the saviors of the city of Kiev, which is in modern-day Ukraine, which gets its name from Ukrainian, which means the skull. Now, according to legend, and in the movie, which is worth watching, I recommend, there's actually two. There's the American version and the Russian version. The American is a very fantastical 60s version. I'm surprised it could have ever gotten made, considering the subject matter. And the Russian version is essentially the modern Braveheart of 21st century Russia. So, Taurus Bulba tells the tale of two brothers who are raised outside of the care of their father after he's betrayed by the Poles, and their land is taken from them. So he vows that they will deceive the Poles by educating their sons in Polish schools. And Eventually, they will overthrow the Poles, and they will return the cities to their own people, and the Cossacks will save, again, Kiev, this time from the Poles. And it's perhaps interesting that Kiev is so close to Khazaria, and that this is the area where the Cossacks would have been invading from, according to this legend. Because the Cossacks, who are considered to be the pogroms of the Russians who destroyed and caused the great emigration into New York of the Jewish people of New York and of Canada, are also from the same place. And there is a correlation etymologically between Khazarian languages, and there is genetic evidence that the Khazarians are the modern Ashkenazi Jewish people. And in fact, it is difficult to find a Sephardic genome in the Ashkenazi. In other words, it is difficult to say that the Ashkenazi are from Palestine, but are definitively from modern-day Georgia, which is where Khazaria was. It's currently Georgia, near Russia. So, the other interesting etymological link is the Finns. And the Finns have their flag, which is the Air Force flag, with the Shvazi on it, the propeller, which it's very interesting that the propeller on wings is so Sumerian looking. And if you were to just put your thumb over the center of the symbol so that you can't see the objectionable content, it would seem very, very, very Mesopotamian. However, this symbol is, of course, older than the 20th century German revolution's National Socialism, and so the flag is continually waved to this day. So, an interesting side note about the Khazarian correlation. Also, the Finnish people, their language is not Indo-Aryan. It is not connected to Sanskrit. It has 24 cases, which alludes to a derivative culture of many castes and high formality for interaction between aristocracy and merchant classes and different sorts of people and workers. So, but these symbols have existed for a long time, and we inherited these fallen stars. And the thing about these symbols is they're not meant to be understood often by the layman. And so they can go on for a long time and have new meaning that has been ascribed to them. An example is the post office symbol of the United States, which used to be, before it was an eagle, the symbol of Mercury riding upon the Earth disk of America and handing off a message. Another is the Jolly Roger skull. Skull comes from the Hebrew word for the skull that blossoms, skull, which means rose, as a skull blossoms from the womb. It is also called the Jolie Rouge, and it was a flag that was used not by, well, sometimes perhaps by pirates. Pirates didn't have their own flags. They would take other people's flags, right? But it would make sense for a pirate to take a banking flag like this because they would want to look like a banking ship. And since the Jolly Rouge was used pretty much by the Knights Templar and the banking ships to show that they were an armed ship, and we call it the Jolly Roger because of the French translation, the Jolie Rouge, which is because it was a red flag. So, let's start by looking at a story called How the Irish Saved Civilization. The untold story of Ireland's heroic role from the fall of the Rome to the rise of medieval Europe. And essentially, it explains that when the fall of the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, because of the Justinian plague, or whatever atrocities went down, because there has been a number of plagues, and there are records of the 15th century and the 5th century plagues, which leads back to our calendar conversion that we'll talk about later. Also, the name Byzantine, and Vizier, and Byzantium are all correlated, which we'll get into later with the etymology of Tartarian words when we get into etymologies. So we're told that these rowboats, after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, brought all sorts of empire property to the west of Europe, where traders and merchants from specifically Ireland, the porters, were able to sell and trade this iconography, and the markets were filled with books from the Byzantine Empire and Rome, which were valued and were collected, and this led to the Renaissance and a rebirth of civilization because of astute learners who were surrounded in information. And this makes a certain amount of sense. We know that the keepers of information are educated, right? And they're better than other people, of course, because they learn things, and that's what it is that makes them so much better. Not. Anyway, so this is the crest of Carl Jung, and this is his family crest, which inspired him as a young boy to study symbols, because he wanted to know what the inherent value of these inherited symbols was that he had been given, and apparently had been correlated with the kingdom and with fantastical legacy of war. And there's a library and a castle, so you want to understand the background. But he ended up creating this, which was his own Carl Jung crest, and you'll see that it retracts the four-cornered flag into a three-layered flag, where there's a line of heaven in between the land, and the land is divided into the four corners and that which grows downwards and upwards, as above so below, which feeds off the sun and the earth, which is the perfect link of the torus. And above the head of the helmet is an angel holding grapes, which is then above lightning rods at the base of the name Carl Jung. So this gets into the idea of talismans and their magical power, and why people use medallions, and why they're so correlated, and why these symbols are the same in so many places. For instance, the red shield of the Rothschilds, which you'll see it has the Tartarian, double-headed, Austro-Hungarian, Byzantine, Scottish Rite, double-headed eagle, or phoenix, holding in its hand the wand or scepter, and the ornament that represents this metaphysical realm, where you have a hollow sphere that is at a water level, and in the center is a magnetic cross. So, further into the coat of arms of the Rothschilds, similarly, their more complex coat, which represents the five suns, has the four shields of the four corners of Europe, with a red shield in the center of it, representative of supposedly a very ancient shield in the center of the shield. However, what's strange about this shield is it's often represented as having horns, and then the centric disc shield looks very much like a money funnel to me. If you've ever seen a coin orbiter, you can put a coin in, and it comes out the center of a vortice. And if you know about fluid dynamics, what goes down also sends energy back out. So it's like a tornado. And so also, before we get deeper into why symbols are the way they are, let's look at the handheld arrows on both corners. So we have, it's a dragon and a phoenix, and then there's a griffin and a unicorn on either side. And the griffin and the unicorn, I would suppose, would be the most fantastical creatures representing Tartaria. And these hands are holding the arrows, and often we remember in the symbol of the empire that it was a bundle of arrows held together by themselves with string and making themselves into a tool. And this should probably cover woven braids, which are intricate, valuable tools that intertwine and interlock and save. And the Boy Scouts are not the only ones to use these. They're interestingly passed down by women very often. However, they're a legacy and a skill that are very useful, and to this day are often referred to as Turkish head knots, but I think we can say Tartarian head knots in 2019. So braiding a single rope very important. Braiding is a very important skill. Here they're being held, and their weapons, they're pointed. They're very clearly for weapons, but they're pointed one down and one at the other, coming down. And the other one is not able to lift it up in time to defend itself. And there are 5 arrows in the hand, and this represents the capital as well as the nations and the kingdoms that are controlled. For instance, the dollar shows the American eagle holding 13 arrows. So shields have important meanings, crests have important meanings, and it goes back very far to the power of a witch named Medea. And Medea is also where we get the word media, medicine, Mediterranean, medallions. There are many more, actually, that you'll probably think of that I'm not mentioning right now. But Medea was a witch, and she was maybe more of a esoteric occult scientist. And this gets back into the idea of the Chinese, which symbol would they save, because they would make talismans by taking letters, removing the vowels, and turning the consonants into one symbol, forward and backward. And you get a message that is hard to deconstruct, but you know what it means, and I call it encryption. It's sort of like a cryptology mixed into hieroglyphic symbols, because you don't necessarily have a full phoneme anymore, but there is representation of the consonants, which is sort of this inherent logic. If you think about the Kiki and Boba, sometimes straight lines and points, like this arrow, are thought of almost universally to represent Kiki when they're asked which one is Kiki and Boba. And curves are representative of Boba. So there is some sort of a logic to what sounds represent which symbols. In fact, that's why G and C come from right angles in Sumerian. And in Sumerian, of course, we'll get into later the phonemes of Tartaria, because the Sumerian alphabet is actually newer than Tartarian. And we have evidence of this. It's not... none of this is like without citation. There will be citation for all of these accusations and claims being made. However, in the meantime, let's look at the idea of the sigil and the crest and the talisman and why it was important to these people that were hiding these meanings from other people. So they did not want everyone to understand them. And so they would set them up in a way that kept them safe to be seen in public and misunderstood. And so it's a form of magic. And a lot of people understand magic. Not everybody likes what they see, although I like the POTUS in this picture because he clearly knows what's going on and he's not too worried about it. But the people on either side of him are, because they can tell he's rocking boats. But there is power in symbolism that is not related necessarily to the observer. The audience might think that it's a mainstream Christian symbol, but the Vesca with the red cross coming out is Maitreya, or I'm sorry, for now I call him the Christ, but these represent an entirely older religion than what we've been told that they represent. The Vesca actually represents the 2 pillars coming together to create a portal. Between the 2 pillars are the sight of God. There is a stage that is set up for worship with an altar, and the top of the pillars are just below God or the architect. And so on the other side, you can see that there are, on top of the pillars, spheres that are representative of the earth and of the stars. But it's the interior and the exterior. One is supposed to be the north and the south, or as above and so below, or inside or outside of the perspective. And within the 2 pillars is one portal into truth, because on either side of the portal is not truth. However, that divide falsehoods from the realm of truth. Between them is a center stage that is lit by the architect, between the sun and the moon. Above the pillars are 2 spheres, representative of the north and the south, or the interior and the exterior, the earth and the space, as inner space and outer space. However, above the pillars, they're able to see not only inside of the realm of the God stage, they're able to see above and out into the realm of falsehoods. It is only when they're able to see what each other are able to see that they're able to see the true light of the architect. And this is the portal, the one portal that is the truth. And according to what is truth? Truth is what can be seen by two parties. And the symbol is very old. We see that it's been used for sports. This is an Italian company, Fila, and the Etruscan alphabet is mirror backwards. So we have Aleph is the name of the Hebrew symbol that represents the two pillars, and we'll have a series a bit more on Hebrew geometry, but it also represents the Byzantine bird, because it's the two seers, the two whole seers, and we get the word Holy See from the Vatican's name, from being able to see, from being able to see outside the kingdom. So being able to see inside the grid is the aim of the architect and of a shared lens between the inner space and the outer space. And a view outside the pillars is a special, lucky thing for some, but it's also a curse for others if they want to know what they think of as an absolute truth that is true for both the inner and outer space realm. So the Holy See was responsible for taking a lot of this information. In fact, the Freemasons don't happen for hundreds of years until after the Catholic Church has banished the Jesuits, and the Jesuits have to start their own organization. So the Byzantine symbols became Catholic. And we know that the Catholic Church did not invent this symbolism, but for some reason we seem to attribute them to the Freemasons in the Enlightenment era. But we also know they studied Rosicrucian texts of Hermes, and that these are much older concepts. So it truly was a holy roaming empire that brought themselves to the information and then took the information elsewhere. They were conquest doers that took people, places, and things and shuffled them up. And you could not ever question this, or else you could end up in a lot of trouble. We landed on Plymouth Rock, and not that Plymouth Rock landed on us, as Malcolm X said. But who are we to argue with the finders of the New World and their manifest destiny? Because we would most likely be committed, or worse, considered witches, and that has a worse route to take. But in the 19th century, it wasn't just that they put you at the stake, they put people in lunatic asylums. And lunatic, of course, means a lunar addict, someone addicted to the moon. We now know that the symbol for the sun and the moon next to the giant symbol are the sun and the moon. The giant symbol is Saturn. And so these were Saturn addicts that were told to never mention Tartaria again. If they ever did, refer to it, of course, as the old country, and that it was bad a lot of the time. Also, and the old country. The old country. Everywhere was the old country. So, in that milieu of global conflict, doesn't matter where you're from, that you experienced. Whether it be 260 days worth of asteroidal impacts and earthquakes and comets and devastations that lit up the sky and tore apart epic stone cities across the world, including Caracas and in Chile and in Colombia and in France and in Russia, where there were, by the way, earthquake in Spanish, called terremoto. Also, Krakatoa's Java events, and the annihilation of Moscow, where a stone city was burned to brimstone. And they'll tell you about the wood structures in Russia, and there were wood structures, but that's not a wood bridge. We're just part of some sort of Napoleonic invasion, and that Napoleon was just this super complex guy. And that war with Eurasia, we've always been at war with East Asia, or, I mean, who amongst us can remember what it was like before, and what the narration was before the 1790s and 1830s, because it's all been erased. And this gets us into this concept of Paris syndrome, which I thought sounded crazy until I actually went to Paris. And it only works on certain kinds of people. Apparently it's very common on Japanese and on students. And what happens is, when you've studied Paris and you actually know about Paris, Paris does not make any sense. It's not, the actual Paris is not like the studies of Paris. The place does not add up to interpretation. And of course, you're supposed to throw away your studies, right? And then believe what you see. I hope. Well, so Plymouth Rock landed on us, and it's a great story, really, the way it's told by people that are knowingly supposed to be liars. Anyway, that they escaped from the Dark Ages. And imagine for a second that you're in the Dark Ages. You know, it's whether it's real or not. Just close your eyes. You're in the dark, and it's dirty, and there's no lights when you open them. Everything's covered in mud. There's no plumbing, and so you go and you find a book club. And the book clubs are cool. Men's associations, fraternal lodges that are well lit at night. They're clean, and they have meetups. They have maker spaces. They have a fab lab, tech shops, lodges that are full of information from all over the world, and they're collecting more information all the time. And some of these guys are even making their own works about these works to explain the works that are too old to be understood. And from them are steam machines coming out and interesting contraptions. Brilliantly, they rediscovered the secrets of the pyramids. Except, where are all those new pyramids? Except for the Louvre and, you know, the glass hollow pyramids, and, you know, they're not the same thing. So, like, there was an era of Rosicrucianism in the 1650s that we're told happened, where the Cathars took this information that they had been saving from ancient Egypt and Sumeria and Hermes, and they learned so much about how it mattered that they forgot the dreams inside their own heads, and they started emulating and making statues and architecture to the gods, temples to the gods of other people. Which Andrea Palladio, he either stole it and described it, and I think he's a great example of one of these lodge dissertationists, and it seems like pretty obvious that's the official story anyway. He isn't supposedly a creator of this architecture, he's simply a chronicler. Andrea Palladio was a student of the works of Vitruvius, or Vitruvia, whom is also the origin of the Vitruvian Man, or Vitruvian Man of Leonardo da Vinci, who was a proponent of his works as well. Now, as you've heard me say, Vitruvia, think of this piece of Trubian trivia, which there is a Spanish city called Trubia that is a Spanish Gothic city in the Spanish state of Astyria, or Bysteria. And it was a 19th century colonial industrial factory town known for their Trubia tanks, the homemade tanks, supposedly, of the Spanish Civil War. And these tanks were phenomenal pieces of machinery that led to, after the capture by nationalist troops, the creation of the Panzer tank, which was one of many weapons that came out of the Trubian factories. Trubia has the architecture, it has the technology, it's Vitruvia. So, Vice-Rubia, or the Western Byzantine Empire, the Western Roman Empire, Vice-Tartaria. That gets us into the Spanish Habsburg Empire. And España, I thought, as a child, meant the bread, right? Espan, but it doesn't, and there's some sort of Iberian etymology to refer to a stone or bronze and metalworking advanced civilization, which is interesting. And I think we're going to pick it up from here next time. Thanks a lot. So we'll be talking about empirical imperialism in the Tartary series. We're going to talk a bit about America and the name, and Giovanni Caboto, or John Cabot, or as he was known in Venice in his lifetime to his friends, Swan Ciabato. And Swan is, I guess, the John of Venice. And yes, this is his face. Earlier, I posted the Ptah-Hotep group. I've chosen the She letter of Cyrillic for Hotep, so it would be easier to find for Cyrillic alphabet seekers. But also, I found it interesting that his name was Swan, and Szechuan comes from this. So, also, this is Swan's house. You can see evidence of, an understory. And this is the other option for the name of America. Amerigo Vespucci, or Vespucci, whom is also a Spaniard, Italian, a Castile. So then, last time we were talking about how after Krakatoa, an entire civilization was wiped out, hundreds of thousands of people dead, everything dead in sight, except not, because there was Roger Verbeek. Verbeek is a pretty, there's not a lot of information about him. He's born April 7th, he's from the Netherlands. He worked for the Dutch East India Trading Company in Indonesia, but he's the guy who somehow went on a rowboat to Krakatoa, only for a few minutes, of course, but he saw it, and then he left. And then there's, of course, the book by Alan Bailey about the Krakatoa Lighthouse, because, there was a lighthouse, and it's still there, Fourth Estate Lighthouse, and someone supposedly survived in the lighthouse. There's a video, like a National Geographic, I think, made about Krakatoa, and it's essentially this concept that this man and this guy in his lighthouse survived underwater, and then they were immediately famous and made lots of money. But, like more money than anybody ever. Lots of money. Like, crazy amounts of money. And, yeah, this lighthouse, the Fourth Point Lighthouse, it was submerged underwater, and it's right, there under... this is just... yeah, it's insane. Because he was there for 30 days, okay. But, yeah, here's the lighthouse. A super cool lighthouse, don't get me wrong. So, these are the traders of the Lost Archives, the Universal Trading Company, right? Universal Trading Company, the Dutch East Indies and West Indies Trading Company. The Occidental Universal? I don't know. Here's a recap of trivia I wanted to mention last time we talked about Andrea Palladio, whether or not he actually studied Vitruvius and the Vitruvian Man from Leonardo da Vinci, and we think about how that could be, Leonardo da Vinci talks a lot about, femininity and androgyny. Well, maybe trivia, the electrical systems that Asteria had that ended up in the war that became Panzer tanks and were originally homemade tanks of the Civil War, and the electric systems that they had invented probably came from Tartaria. Well, let's get into steam power, because the electric steamers of the 19th century are fantastic, and they don't really require coal, they just require steam, and so I propose that they were electric. Now, there are lots of examples of steam-powered electric things. Nuclear generators are steam-powered, and nuclear itself is a steampunk technology. And they want you to convince you that it's dangerous, of course, like oil companies and whatever. Anybody. It's really a safe, simple thing that you can produce a amount of heat that then produces pressure, and the water pressure then feeds off of this regulated cold water to hot water, and then spins turbines, which produce electricity and generate energy. So we have examples of this that are abound. Here's a Swiss electric steam train. Here's a General Electric steam train. God, that's a beautiful steam train. And here's, an exploded boiler, and you start seeing, what happens when they don't know how to run an electric steam train. They start putting coal in it, because it's intuitive that you can heat up steam and electricity to heat up water to make steam. It's a natural progression. Steam power, electric power. Here's the LMS Princess Royal Electric Steam Engine, but it's also just so beautiful, right? Like, I believe LMS stands for like London, Midland, Scotland rail system. I think that's what it is. So this is a British rail. So all these trains were used to get gold and silver and salt from places. Here's the salt flats in Bolivia in Uni, where there's a graveyard of these steam-powered trains. And I've been there, and there's just miles of them, and you can climb all over them. No one's going to stop you. There's nothing else out there, really, besides harmonic frequency patterns of these hexagonal salt crystals that you can just for miles. But these trains, right, like, just look at these beautiful cast iron machines that are just abandoned here, and compare them to the Tribune electric rail systems. So it gets us back into the west of the Red Roman Empire and the Spanish Castile-Habsburg Empire, the Hispanic Germanics. And we talked about how Hispania does not mean the bread. It means something in Iberian to the effect of the metal civilization, which makes sense. And Habsburg family, the Bohemian family of Elizabeth Valois, who was, she was Parisian or French, and then her son was Bohemian. Well, France had very little power during this time because of, apparently they probably did. Let's think about Charlemagne slightly differently before he converted to the Roman Empire's Catholicism. I assume France was very powerful. However, it was maybe less global at this time. The Roman Empire also limited in a sense, but you can see where it was strengthened. But the black nobility of Eastern Europe, is separate, and so you can see how the Spanish Habsburg Empire was just huge. Italy is split. North Italy is Germain. South Italy is Spanish Germain. So Germain Spain also is not one place. It's like the United States at best. It's more like Switzerland. You've got people that speak different languages everywhere, though. In the northwest, you've got Galatians. In the northeast, or the center, I guess you could say, you have the Basque state, which is in Spain and in France, and ought to be its own state. Really, it is essentially, and it should be. Then there's the Valencia, which, just look how close it is to the Byzantine Empire. And there's just a lot of trade going on at this point with the Moors in the southeast, and there's a route called the Camino de Santiago. An important book to consider is the Song of Ronan, which really compares the Arabs and the Europeans on levels where the poor with the poor on either side and the richer with the rich on either side. The Templars and the Ottomans are the same. Here's the DNA of Germanic Italians, and notice the vibrancy of high concentration in the north. Also, the spot, where something happened. And has the RZ36 phenotype is limited in the south, which is another interesting aspect. So it shows that there is a very specifically Germain Italy. And here is the South Germain city. These are Italian Alpine cities. So Italy had at one point been actually where that red begins. And after World War II, when Germany was forced to return lands, everyone had to show the maps. Italy had made false maps that showed that they were a much grander sized state than they had been. And even though the people up there still speak German, they're Italians now. So here's some Tartarian architecture. And here's the dominion of the Habsburg family, spread out across Transylvania. At a certain point, the United Empire is just so expansive that it covers all of Spain, but also all of northern Germanic regions such as the Netherlands. The Huguenots are included in this, and the Dutch, which leads to the 80-Year War and the Dutch East Indies Trading Company. And of course, Ferdinand and Isabella, this is an interesting, beautiful Ferdinand and Isabella from the Netherlands, or not Ferdinand and Isabella from Spain, or are they? Supposedly they're not, but something interesting to look into slightly more. I mean, I'm not suggesting they are yet, but it is an interesting correlation, and that they were run out of town for their control of the Netherlands. Also, the Netherlands was considered the land over there that was run by itself. It rather bothered the Spanish Empire. And here was Alexander, the Duke, and he ran the Netherlands. Also notice that Ferdinand is drawn to be kind of a schmuck. I'm not sure a better word. He just doesn't look super assertive. And his wife ends up giving the kingdom keys to her handsome Croatian friend, Christopher Columbus. Also, here's the Habsburg crest, and I think we've gone over this. It's the dragon with the peacock figures. And from 1568 to 1648 in Holland was the war of the 80-Year War, which led to the secession of Holland from Spain, and also in this time was the looting of the churches of Lyon and a great period of iconoclasm. When the churches were looted, the symbols were taken down. This could be an interesting time to look for devastation of Tartaria because of the iconoclasm. I mean, we see the building storm of 16th century, the building storm, where people just went around tearing things apart and looting statues. And if you go to some of these churches that haven't been looted in certain places, you'll find horned statues of gods that are Athenian in Catholic churches still. So it's clear that these churches were not always, I don't know if it's clear that they were not always religiously Christian, but it's interesting that they presuppose that they were built at a time when they did not understand the Bible, and therefore they had all sorts of symbols for non-biblical and perhaps pagan. Also, Spanish pillaging of gold and the stamping and minting of coinage led to the inflation of gold and its value being worth less than silver. People had enough gold, and they said, all right, I got enough gold. Can you give me silver? And that literally went down at some point, which shows how much gold there was, and also how little gold there was before that. Also interesting is the father of Francois again. So here are some personal seals, and they eventually become representative of the kingdom's wealth itself. And notice the Arabic writing on the backside of the East India coinage, and the fractional rupee of copper coins. Eventually, paper money replaces these coinages, but not until the Dutch East India Company. And it's interesting that Marco Polo talks about paper money before this, but these written receipts really start again with corporatism. And we're supposed to believe that all of this information that the porters had grabbed from the Library of Alexandria, such as the Camera Obscura, and anything else from the Hellenistic wisdoms of engineers, such as the Hero steam engine, was just repurposed in Arabia. I'm going to start a series episode on the Latter-day Saints. I want to quickly read 1 Thessalonians 5:21 through 22. Test everything, hold fast to what is good, and abstain from every form of evil. There's a better translation, but it's essentially like, test all things and hold fast to what is good, and abstain from everything that is bad. Because this is the Kali Yuga and all. And with that, I say try a little bit of LDS, and working for, he's an engineer also. So perhaps you have to believe. Anyway, he was a good boy, this Joseph Smith, and he was trying to find out from God directly how to be the best and which way was the right way. And God said to start his own fellowship, so he did. Eventually it led to a religion with the plural marriage system, which led to a lot of controversy about the church itself. I don't really see this as a big controversy. I'm surprised it is, considering, And essentially, he had an alpha wife, and he had a system. And after the Mormon Wars, there was a lot of widows. So, because there had been a genocide campaign, an extermination, at least, of the Latter-day Saints from Missouri. And a brutal war that just killed so many people, women and children even. You know, I've heard quotes that the boys and girls 5 to 10 years old begged not to be shot, and they were told that lice breeds rats, something to that effect. So Brigham Young, after Joseph Smith, led with the Missouri Wars behind him, and created with Joseph Smith, after the fall of Joseph Smith, this epic religion. And it makes a lot of sense. Also, progenitors would, like Charles Dawkins, who, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day, sometimes, unless it's spinning randomly, in which case it could be wrong all the time. The point is, Richard Dawkins, he did say that there's a selfish gene, and it's the idea that genes would like to exterminate all the other genes. And essentially, his religion talked about this prophet from this ancient culture that spanned the world, and the Mormons were trying to create this heaven where they were actually more than just on death to you part, you become your own existence. And it's a fascinating concept because it gets into this idea of Mormon transhumanism and becoming more than just a person, but becoming an entire type of civilization with beings underneath you. So Latter-day Futurism is an interesting subject, and there's actually a field of it if you're interested in Latter-day Saint transhumanism, Mormon transhumanism. Yeah, I'll skip that part. But really, it's about creating this heaven on earth, because you imagine that you've created a society where everything is perfect, and you try to convert them. You say, oh, well, when you die, you'll go to heaven and be with God. And they say, well, we already live forever, and we don't understand what's the difference between heaven and a place where we have no sickness or hunger and everything's happy all the time. And who is this God, and how is it more powerful and more knowledgeable and wise than we are? You know, and this is this next level civilization. Religion is slightly more interesting in the way it's been presented, and I think, you know, it deserves a little bit of credit. So, also, he got what he wanted, and it turned into this crazy thing. And it wasn't so great to have 99 wives, because a lot of them turned out to be of other men, or the men were just in general angry and jealous for not having them themselves, so they martyred or murdered Joseph Smith in a fashion that made him more famous and made it impossible for him to do anything bad ever again. So it only allowed you a legacy of positivity for the most part, and then hearsay. So this is an interesting time to find out that Joseph Smith is not, you know, they're telling you often he's a drunk, angry, fat, ugly man, so here's his death mask, right? And you get an idea that they didn't really lie about his pictures. He was, you know, a rather handsome, you know, man. Interesting also, right? So 15 years earlier, before he died, he had been reading out of a hat, and I think you've probably seen the South Park, but there's more to it than that. It's an interesting story about this Indo-Aryan American empire that was literate and had medals, and it's interesting that so much of it seems to have been disappeared, but we think it could be just stolen, you know, like it belongs in a museum, Indiana Jones would say. But he also talked about different races in the Americas that had been genocided, raped into extinction, or, you know, the Lamanites, the Jaredites, the Molochites, and the Nephites. It's a very interesting correlation with Alexandrian Coptic stories about Tartaria, and the Mogul cities are mentioned in the Jaredites or the Molochites. They have the flags. This is from a Mormon book about the Jaredites too. It's like Genghis Khan's, you know, hordes in Europe. Mormon scholars have gone deep into this. And we talked last time a bit about mega floods and wars, and the idea of these storm wars that existed in the 19th century or before, that are photographed and documented as floods and droughts and dust storms throughout the 19th century, including this picture of Sacramento that, as far as the eye can see, is both water and cities, which is an interesting aside, plus the electric systems. And you find that these megastorms were not freak events, but repeated about every 200 years. although coincidentally, I tend to think that those are the same events, and we'll get into more about why later. But the sedimentation that has resulted was documented, and geologists in California will tell you about the mega floods and the mud floods. So here's a picture of simultaneously the drought happening to the flood, and within the same year or two, you see a difference in the clearing out. And also, there was a Mormon island in the 1830s that's been buried under a lake in California because of a dam, and it was very, very vibrant. There was a bridge. It's been uncovered recently, more or less, and you can see the quality of the stonemasonry is almost Peruvian again, and Gothic, Visigothic, and alludes to this Tartarian concept. And here's another example of a submerged ghost city. Here's another example of a submerged ghost city. You'll find these around South America, here in the world, but here's one in Venezuela, in Potosi, where they built a dam in order to essentially hide this church. They had electricity, of course. South America gets most of its electricity from Paraguayan dam, but iconoclasm, communist era, right? So we've got the building kind of wiped out, and interestingly enough, it survived. And when it resurfaced, it was still the last thing that lasted. So they tried to blow it up. Seriously, they tried to blow it up with dynamite. This is what's left of it. That should provoke you as well. And there's lots of other churches that are, you can look up ghost water churches, underwater churches, submerged cathedrals, and you'll see that they're everywhere. Canada has full cities. This is like, in Europe, I think this is in Venice, I forget. Near Venice is an island called Proviglia, and it was, clearly a star fort, and it has arches and architecture, but it was used for the plague and to house, and then an insane asylum. So I believe it was a biochemical warfare laboratory at some point, or perhaps it was a medical institution for studying, and things went out of control. But it became a very creepy place for the next few centuries. And again, look at the architecture, the arches, and the proportions above and below. So for the golden ratio. Another island that you should look for, because where in the world is Isla Borromeo? It's supposed to be in the Gulf of Mexico. I've heard theories that people say it was made up as a tourist attraction, but I think that that's pretty absurd. It's more likely that the official story from Humboldt sailors showed that it disappeared underwater. Either it sank or the water levels rose, and there's a lot of evidence for water levels and land levels rising. So here's a picture of these dust storms that I think we now know were bigger and longer and not. Just when we were explained about this dust bowl that happened and people driving with these fancy vehicles that cost $500 across the country to just populate this new world, and you gotta wonder about that. Like, the Ford vehicles were insanely cheap, and then they just poured out into the streets with them. So, who amongst us can remember what really happened? It's back to, we constantly are asking about how truth is lies, because everyone's lying to some extent. I mean, people will tell you they've seen this stuff, and who are you going to believe, Because basically your options come down to tall tales, and that's about it. And tall tales are interesting in and of itself. If you start looking into the American tall tales, a lot of them come from the 18th, 19th century. You have stories like Pecos Bill, who sends his wife to the moon, and he rides a dust devil, or a vortice, a vortex, a tornado through the plains. And David Crockett, who was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, predominantly of French Huguenot ancestry, and that gets into the Irish Porter connection because of the porters from Ireland who came bringing the French Huguenots after allied with the British in the war. But Davy Crockett, for all of his eccentric stories, was a real man. David Crockett was a senator. He was considered an amazing hero until he became renowned for his stories, and then he called him a drunk, and they said he was just making up all these fantastic stories, and that there's no way these stories happened during the 19th century, such as there's one, he went to the North Pole because there was a mini ice age, and he restarted the Earth, which had slowed down its spinning from the inside. And he starts the Earth spinning again and heats up, and the Earth begins to rotate again. So you have tall tales, or then you have these sobered surveyors whom you have to trust slightly more, I suppose, than are drunkards. But who are these surveyors? They're the latter-day saints who don't drink, of course, and they're, very hard workers. And they were a godsend, let's say, during the Spanish-American War and in the Civil War. And the U.S. Mormon Battalion March is an infamous long route that was taken as the Mormons went across all of these regions that cover essentially what modern-day mud-flooded areas are, where you can see California's sand, long desert cover. Why would you walk through that desert? And up through the rings, into the lakes, into Mount Zion and around Utah, finding the center of America. And this is the Mormon Capital Battalion Monument in Salt Lake City. And you can see these Sumerian-like stonework in front of this Athenian neoclassical Palladio-inspired building that is of Tartarian ancestry. And here's a tunnel under the Mormon churches. There was a sort of golden dragon hidden in here. So there are tunnels underneath the Mormon temples that lead to places, of course. And also, the Mormon genealogy archives are built into tunnels into the sides of mountains. They are military-like fortifications. This is the best way to put that. And the Mormon genealogy archives are very important because they baptize in the name of all those who have fallen without the opportunity of knowing the religion and baptizing themselves. So they keep very dense records, and in fact run Ancestry.com. And this is where they keep their archives, in these military-like bunkers embedded into the sides of stone mountains. So it's sort of a fantastic story about this group of people that were supposedly the sobered witnesses and their belief in something that's so much of a tall tale. But is it really? Because there's plenty of evidence of the pale Native American tribes, and the idea is less and less disturbing of Indo-Aryan relations with Scythians in South America and North America. So, is it possible that in 1823, when Joseph Smith discovered these golden plates, that they were real? And Joseph Smith preached to the Indians, and many Indians became Latter-day Saints as well, which was very interesting. And that gets into the Cherokee Confederate Alliance. Because he shows the 5 civilized tribes in a sort of negative light at the end of the Book of Mormon. So the Confederate Alliance, and the Cherokee, by the way, who's very fantastic and supposedly is written by a man named Sequoyah, though he even claimed to have gotten it from natives, were part of the principal 5 tribes. And not principled, by the way, but the leading 5 tribes. And they were the civilized. And civilized is an interesting term because these Indians were slave traders themselves and kept slaves. And it is notable that there are descendants of these slaves, not only of the Cherokee, who had thousands, also of the other civilized tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, the Seminoles, and the Creeks, all large slave trade economies, and were the principal slave traders with the, which gets into what the Book of Mormon said about the final winners of the South American Wars. So Temescua started the Indigenous Confederacy, or at least created one, which these could have been Soviets that could reform at any time like lodges. Temescua was known for his iconoclasm of Western symbolism. Temescua's confederacy was an attempt to escape the imperialism of the colonial empire, of corporate British, Dutch, East India traders, who had successfully subjugated, replicate their control over North America that they had. And we're told that the Athenians were our original democratic link, but that's not actually where we get. They were socialist pedophiles. That's not actually where we get democracy and self-determination, which is a more important thing than a dictatorship of the majority oppressing a minority. But we got the Confederacy. The American system of Confederacy came from, and the American system of federal tribalism came from the Confederacy of the Indians. The sacking of Tartary as the United Trade Company's colonial takeover of North America and of South America and of East Asia. So the causes of the War of 1812. Temescua's Confederacy was convinced by the British that it was a wise move to rebel against the United States. And immediately, Temescua and his brother intended to launch a triple threat with the three tribes against the British and the French. Temescua created a confederacy against all white settlers, and the British helped to attack these white settlers. So that's an interesting point, and we're told that it's because the British and the French and the Americans all hated each other, so they thought they could use the Indians as cannon fodder. Might be true. There's an example of this in another state, in Paraguay, which the Jesuits had built this fantastic republic, and there's a film called The Mission, it's worth seeing. They essentially took the same strategy as the French-American War and decimated the population from all angles, from Brazil, from Argentina, and Bolivia, and killed 90 to 99% of the population. Very few women and children survived. And it makes sense why they want to dismantle all of these monuments that are in the name of the fallen Confederates, because these are symbols of family and love and people holding each other together. They're not the symbols of hate that we are taught that they are, or we are reacting to, whereas we're reacting for. And I wondered when this started, how this could go down, that Southern hospitality would become the next hate crime, because, there was also a religion of peace now. There's no such thing as a civil war. I'm going to call it something else. The uncivil war of Federalist crimes against humanity. And it's normally called the War of Northern Aggression, but I don't think that's quite aggressive enough. So, the uncivil war of Federalist crimes against humanity during the War of Northern Aggression. And this is the original flag of the Confederacy. Underneath is the battle flag that we're so familiar with. But in fact, the Confederate flag was very similar to the original. And if you're familiar with the Civil War of Northern Aggression, it's quite a nightmare. It's essentially the first major war that demonstrated industrialization of automatic weapons, major explosives like dynamite. More in another video specifically on technology in the Bright Age, all sorts of crazy weapons. Eli Whitney and standardization leads to mass manufacturing, which makes it possible to produce large amounts of these weapons quickly. For some reason, all of these machines that can dig out California gold were digging these trenches by hand. These are the elite forces digging out these trenches, probably more likely an archaeological dig. They can find something. And whether or not Archimedes had models of these weapons or they existed in ancient times, this is the first time in recent memory that media has made news about them for us to see. For instance, the Gatling gun. But I really want to talk a bit about Confederate submarines. They are a fantastic and interesting thing. And there were Yankee submarines as well, at least the Alligator. But after the war, some of the Confederate technology becomes declassified and available to the public, such as H.L. Hunley's submarine. It's a fantastic design. It has a propeller that is spun through the center. Men will spin it sort of like an egg beater or a bicycle. This is the Pioneer in St. John's Bayou. I saw this one. It got stuck on some seaweed or kelp, the propeller unable to pull out of the underwater, and it was unable to detangle. That's at least the story. And that gets into the tunnels and the literal underground railroads, because there were. And I've always heard that, wondering about the Underground Railroads. And when I was a kid, I asked, was it a real railroad? Some adults will say no. Other ones knew, yes, there were underground railroads and certainly tunnel systems. And they were used to connect to mansions, which then would take them to other locations. In many circumstances, there was a map that connected underground tunnels. Doctors are sawing legs off in shock without any sort of, essentially just robbing women and children of their sons and fathers, taking them down from the potato famine. Drafting it's conscripting men, and they're killing them 20-1 often. Grant says, send me more troops drunkenly because they get killed a lot. It's okay because every 20 men, they get 20 more men, but there's only so many Southerners, and fight around their houses, they fought in their houses often. Like, this was not fought far-flung from where their homes were. They would have been their homes, for some perspective. Watch Gangs of New York, again, for some perspective on how the North actually felt, the way they treated Irish and African Americans, not the South, which was a rather glamorous culture, especially in French areas like Louisiana. So we're told about General Sherman, who marched across, destroying the towns. If you ever see a hand put in a jacket like that, it means they're keeping a secret. Was a natural blight. It could have been just a reason of monocropping, and that's a lovely story, but it actually was a deliberate event in order to kill off as many Irish.
Come on. Do this now. Without a fucking hitch. Now it's got a fucking...
And it didn't always work out well. Here's an example of blast.
Getting all sketchy on me. Sorry guys, I gotta rewind a bit.
Grant says, send me more troops drunkenly because they get killed a lot. It's okay because every 20 men, they get 20 more men, but there's only so many Southerners. And notice these tunnels. They didn't just fight around their houses, they fought in their houses often. Like, this was not fought far-flung from where their homes were. They were defending their homes, for some perspective. Watch Gangs of New York, again, for some perspective on how the North actually felt, the way they treated Irish and African Americans, not the South, which was a rather glamorous culture, especially in French areas like Louisiana. So we're told about General Sherman, who marched across, destroying the towns. If you ever see a hand put in a jacket like that, it means they're keeping a secret. We were told that the potato famine was a natural blight. It could have been just a reason of monocropping, and that's a lovely story, but it actually was a deliberate event in order to kill off as many Irish as possible. The food was evacuated from the country, the people were starved and killed, and they were kept from eating seaweed, even. This is something that has happened before and will happen again. One of the examples, of course, is the Holodomor of the Ukraine, which is a tragedy not even describable, but let me try. They took a bunch of kids, they shot them if they picked grain off the ground, they starved them to death while they made them work, and then they took all the wheat and food and sold it, and this is how they emptied the Ukraine. And we'll get into why the Ukraine is so important to this Georgian man, Stalin. So it was a time of starvation and emigration, where men and women and children were sent in mass exodus from their homes across the world. And there are trains that actually took boys and girls to all over the country, the lost boy generation of the 18th and 17th and the 19th century. And if you've ever heard of being Shanghaied, where you wake up on a boat on the way to Shanghai, well, a lot of these boys became soldiers, and it didn't always work out well. Here's an example of blast wounds. So, these are the kids, by the way, that were... And I bet this guy didn't have a slave. Was one, though. He was an indentured servant. They want you to forget, and the only way to do that is to tear down any physical remnants and any iconography, and to obscure the intention. And the alternative narrative, of course, is that once the Confederacy were a free people, It was the Second War of Independence, and there were a lot of African Americans that fought on the side of the Confederacy and kept their pride into their elderly years. My father's generation were probably the last kids to get to meet Confederate and Yankee soldiers that were still around after the war. But they have a very specific narrative that doesn't really fit with what we're told. Essentially, the more you look into it, it makes a lot more sense why there were so many Confederate African Americans. They saw slavery Emancipation Proclamation, which only liberated Confederate slaves who had rebelled. North slaves would still be in slavery. Imagine finding out, and by us being an American slave who could read, which there were, and finding out that they were not freed because they were able to understand the fine print. And then began the period of deconstruction. 15 years of complete control where there were soldiers guarded on all corners. And simultaneous wars goes on and on around the world. Particularly Franco wars are interesting to look at, such as the Franco-Swedish and the Second French intervention in Mexico, which happens simultaneously to the war in the United States and the Yankees during their martial law occupation of the South. Notice also the Franco uniforms are very similar to the Yankee uniforms, and it can be said that the war may have existed because of the inability to enforce the Monroe Doctrine internationally abroad of the United States. And these are the kids who fought for the Confederacy, just for some more perspective, and you could say that they were just forced to fight, but I'll tell you a little bit about this guy he died in his backyard defending his sisters in the house, and his last words were, "Home, home, home," as he died in the field. It wasn't that he, wanted to fight so much, but that he kind of had to. But he got left holding the bag, like an entire new nation got left holding the bag, and it's interesting it's not remembered so much for the ending of slavery, that instead it's, remembered for the history that came before it. And it's the history that we're trying to discover, that we're being kept from. This gets into the idea that once we were free, because when the 13th Amendment mentioned slavery for the first time in the Constitution, it actually defined its use, where it says, "Slavery or involuntary servitude shall exist as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Literally legalized slavery. So, there's that. Oh yeah, and why is it called slavery again? It comes from Slavic people, from when they were objectified so often it became a verb by the Moorish slavers, 12 years a Slav. And the tie comes from Croatia. It's the cravat, a Slavic invention. This is how we do, or how we did, because this is more how we're seen these days, apparently. But I get back to the Paraguay Triple Alliance War, which genocided 90% of the population. But it's very similar that in 1865, and all this is happening simultaneously, remember. Paraguay is having the Triple Alliance War at the exact same time as the Uncivil War of Northern Aggression and wiping out 90% of the populations. And they were literate people then, but that's all to the more to the point about Tartaria. So, these are some of the remnants of their people. And in the north of Paraguay, in the west, is a place called Philadelphia, where every sign is in German. I've actually been there. There's literally a street called South Hindenburg Avenue. It's just fantastic and interesting, but there's not much more than dirt roads everywhere, but just beautiful brick buildings. It's some of the most fantastic deep basement buildings you're going to find in Paraguay, and perhaps the world. Interesting architecture around.
Absolutely amazing, bud. I don't know who you are, but you fucking put that shit together absolutely beautifully, and I thank you. Oops. Alright, hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Ceremonial Witch back again. So I don't think I predicted that well. I actually turned out to be a 2-hour recording, and I wasn't lying, I promise you, I thought it was only an hour and a half. But that's because it was already, I had started playing on my thing, and it goes on a timer, so I said an hour and 34, but whenever it started, it actually said 2 hours. So I apologize for that. So that means I only have about half an hour speaking. But that being said, I gotta stop making promises because I very seldomly keep them when I tell you I'm gonna come back on after and shit like that. But I am gonna try to come back on. Just don't want to promise it again. But anyway, so what you just heard can be pretty controversial. But like he said in the beginning, just try to put your thinking cap on and check your belief systems at the door, basically, and just go along with it. Take the information for what it is, a different version of information. The information you learned at school was very similar to being indoctrinated in any religion. They just tell you how it is. This is their religion. They promote this religion. They make their living through this religion. Therefore, they're not going to tell you the other religions are right or wrong. They're only going to tell you what they want you to know. Just like the winner of any war, they tell you their side of the story, whether it's the opposite side of the story and they just adopt their point of view and change it, saying the oppressors were the ones that they just fought against and won, because everybody likes to see the hero conquer. They come from, losing, the underdog winning, basically. So that's the story they portray. Germany wanted to take over the world, so we had to go over there and shut down Germany before Germany came over here, which, if Germany was coming over here, well, whatever. Little movies like Captain America and shit like that, they put little tidbits in there, like people forget the first country Germany invaded was itself. They put these little ideas that stick in your head, because that's still stuck with me, I remember that every time I think about Marvel Captain America, but now when I think of it, I think about, well, is that really true or not? And I'm not going to say it isn't true. I'm not going to go around saying the Holocaust didn't happen. I'm not going to go around saying Germany or Russia or any of those places over there are actually Tartaria. I'm not going to go around saying any of that shit, because all I know is the version I was taught versus the version I am now looking up. And I'm going to make my decision, and it's going to be part of my own beliefs. And I'm not going to go around forcing that on anybody, or I'm not even going to preach it out here. But that's the reason I play these videos for you guys, because, if you're watching my stuff and you're trying to do the things I tried to teach in the first, let's say the first 30 episodes was basically me teaching magic on how to do specific magic before I really got into playing videos and books and documentaries and shit like that. But the same concept for the documentaries is what I'm doing with this quote-unquote fear-based stuff. It's the same process. I'm trying to get you guys to look at something objectively and see it for what it is. It's someone else's point of view of the same thing that we were taught. We were taught a whole different point of view. We were programmed with a whole different point of view. So depending on who you are and where you're from, the things I put on here are meant to go against the paradigm of programming that was built in your head. And it's meant to challenge it so that you either have an emotional reaction, like thinking I'm an idiot, or as if I believe in this and all that. But it doesn't matter if that's what you think or not. What matters is it's going to be in your head. I implanted an idea in your mind, kind of like Inception. I forget that famous line from that movie, but it's basically the same thing. I'm putting this idea in there. As soon as that idea is in your head, it's never going to leave. It's going to stay in there until you either prove it right or prove it wrong. But once again, you can't prove it right or wrong, because it's either the past that you haven't been there. You can go into dreams, you can channel messages from people and all that. But once again, if you believe what you're channeling, or you believe what your dream is experiencing is real, then it's real. And I'm not going to fucking fight you on that. That's your belief. But everybody's allowed to have a different belief. And that's truly what free will is it not? Free will is the ability to have whatever belief we want. We can walk outside of the house, we can stay in our house, we can buy a house, we can rent a house, we can persecute people, we can kill people, we can love people, we can treat people with respect. It's all up to us. But there's only certain free will choices will help you prosper and will bring you prosperity, and other free will choices will bring you hell on earth, quote unquote, or in a manner of speaking. It'll bring you destruction, it'll bring you hate, it'll bring you envy, it'll be completely, but once again, you might need to experience those things to get to the other side. I believe in some of those little old phrases like God doesn't send you anything that you can't overcome. I truly believe that. I truly believe that everything you go through is to teach you something, and it's something you have to learn personally. Not everybody goes through the same experiences with the same sense. You got people that are shy and people that are too outgoing. And I said this in a previous video, that people that are shy need to be a little more outgoing to get to that middle balance. And the people that are too outgoing need to learn to shut up and listen a bit better and stop telling everybody all their personal stuff, because it's going to do them more harm. And they need to become a little more shy to find that balance. Everybody has to find their perfect balance. They have to find that middle ground. But anyways, I don't know what I'm going to talk about this half an hour that I can really go over in all these things. Promissory notes. I love the idea, and I am so on board with trying that. It's one of these areas that needs a ton of information done, and possibly even speaking to one of these individuals who have done it. Same with what Irene did. I love watching Irene's videos, whether it's the live videos of her keeping the cops out and the bankers out, or even her video where she explains it all about her course and all that. I mean, I love how she did that. That was amazing. Or even Mark Hollywood, his videos, he's always saying, you people, I guess, what I'm trying to get at, eh? Or you can see where I'm going with this, But he knows his shit. He's done this. And, he's somebody who says he wants to help people. So I need to take him up on that, or someone needs to take him up on that and see if he's really fucking means what he says. I believe he does. I believe he does want everybody to collapse the system and do it that way. And, I'm not saying the system's bad or good, because I don't know. I mean, I have my intuition and my suspicions on what these people are saying about the monetary system is in fact real, because I've been to court, I've heard the jargon, I've been placed in the cuffs, I've been to the jails, I've been through the system, and I know how they speak, and I know how they treat people, and they do just look at it as pieces of paper. They don't take into fact the emotions, the family. Very seldomly do they do that. TV will add that component when you're watching it, but that's not a real judge on that TV really following the system. They're just playing a part on a movie, and that part is to basically make you feel like the court system is compassionate, and that person is able to use personality and emotion to make its decision, but it doesn't. It's not supposed to. The judge is there to do what his job is, and at the end of the day, that is to, if you're a criminal, put you in jail, basically. And if you broke the law, to get you to pay up, take penance, give you pardon for Saturn, which I don't want people to think Saturn's a bad guy and all this, because he's not. Saturn is the lord of this world, and somebody you want on your side. And whenever you have you have an imbalance in Saturn, well then yeah, it's gonna mimic these characteristics that Christians or whoever call Satan. But that's anything. Venus unbalances Lucifer. Mars unbalances the devil. I mean, Jupiter unbalanced would be like Zeus when he's very wrathful, or Thor when he's beating up fucking Iron Man, whatever the case is. You know what I mean? Point is, any one of these energies unbalanced. Mercury retrograde, when Mercury's backwards or upside down, Mercury has the horns and everything. He's the man and the woman. It's idiotic is what it is. You have to be in balance. All your energies have to be in balance. On that video, he talked about the jellyfish being made up from like 192 jellyfish, making up one jellyfish, but it cannot run independently. And I don't know if you heard me in the background. I think I did say it out loud, but that's what the same. I use the same example, but us on the earth with the trees and the air and the animals and the grass and everything, the water, the fire, we are the organs, the atoms, the cells of God here on this planet, and we are all supposed to be in nature in symbiosis, basically in line with each other, all working towards a common goal with each other. Like the trees produce they breathe in our carbon dioxide and they exhale oxygen, and we do the opposite. So we are in symbiosis with the trees. We are having a relationship with them that we don't feel is necessary, and we can just cut them down, and that's stupidity. Same with the water, same with all the little insects that promote health on the trees or kill the trees that are dying anyways. And, everything is in a beautiful, perfect little cycle on this planet, and we're walking around thinking that we're above it and we can fix anything and we can do anything. And yes, I'm generalizing because I don't think everybody thinks that way, but I believe that we are not told a lot of information. And I said this before, I believe that something is about to happen. 100% something is gonna go down shortly, and it's gonna flip the paradigm. People are becoming awake. Why is that? Well, we're coming out of the Pisces, and we're heading into Aquarius, and this is why this is such a crazy time. People don't understand it. People want to understand it. People keep thinking it's end times, it's revelation, but it's the end of an age. At the end of the age of Pisces, and we're entering the age of Aquarius. Now, I don't know if that's already happened or if that's happening now. All I know is we're experiencing it, whether it's about to happen or it's already happened. I truly feel like it's about to happen, and that's my personal view, but listen to Santos. The videos I put on here are like fucking 6 to 8 years ago. And he said that's when that's happened, and truly that's when the awakening was happening, but yet I could play these videos of Earl Nightingale, or even older, and these people have this information. So yes, there's a grand awakening happening right now, and is that because of the internet? I don't know. We had the internet for a while, so if it's only really booming now, then maybe we're entering the Aquarius now. Some people say it's 2020, some people say it was 2012. None of that matters. It doesn't matter when it happened. All that matters is that it's happening, and we're going through it, and things are going to get worse before they get better. Things are going to get crazy, but things are going to get cool. You know, when the crazy comes out, the cool comes out. You know, when the war comes out, the invention comes out. So I mean, there's always goods and bads about everything, and you have to make sure you know what's going on, I guess. And like I said, I don't want anybody to focus on fear-based media, and I'm not going to put any more of this stuff on. But I felt it was necessary to give you some of the core knowledge shit that I have, that I got, that a lot of my information is derived from. If it wasn't for all this Tartaria shit, I wouldn't have found out a lot of this shit I found out about the monetary system and the lies and the deceit, and then I wouldn't have been led to astrology. I wouldn't have been led to the magic curriculum. I wouldn't have been led to any of this stuff had I not found this shit. You know what I mean? All of this was a circle that I needed to go through. It's the swings around on the 8. You're going through that 8, and when it crisscrosses, you're getting some bad information. You come around the curve, and everything's beautiful. Oh, it starts getting dark again. Hit that crisscross in the middle. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it makes sense in my head. But anyways, when you start finding these informations, you start going down all these different rabbit holes, because from one article, you can start going down the alien path, or the reptilian path, or the chemtrail path, or the fluoride path, or the vaccination path, and none of those paths are going to take you where you need to go. They're just going to take you down more rabbit holes that make you realize that this world is fucked up and that you're a slave. And who needs to look at that? The more you watch that, the more you're going to be a slave, the more you're going to upstairs? I don't know. Okay, she probably just went to get bird seed for the bird sanctuary. Sorry about that. Daughter's looking for mom. But all those things are not gonna. What you focus on, you become. Okay, and that's not just a line. That's not just me saying that. That's not that. This has been proven in my eyes. I don't know if you can actually prove it or not, but from everything I've read and done and seen and said, and from the guys who say it's not real, and then I watch what they become, it's fucking real. From the people that do say it's real and I watch what they become, it's fucking real, because they're becoming success. The people that say it's not real, they become fucking failures, and they're focused on all this shit that's going to fail them. You know what I mean? It's pretty simple, in my eyes anyways. And if you're focusing on just the fear-based stuff, then you are going to become fearful. And if you're in fear, then you're going to attract to you all the shit you don't want, everything you think about that you don't want to happen. But if you're in that emotion of fear, that state of fear, then you're going to attract that. You're going to attract fear, attracts fear. Like attracts like. Anything. It's a better way to put it, but it's more complicated to think about. But whatever you feel, whatever you are, if you feel as if you are a radio star, a podcast star, a movie star, a musician, a rock star, and you keep acting like that every fucking day, then you will have no choice but to become that, is the best way to put it. And that's why they tell you need to be in the vibration of money to attract money. You need to say stuff like, I am money, I love money, I have money, and act as if you're in the moment, and then that money will come to you. It has no choice but to. And this shit's true, but it all depends on how often you can do it. And you can say, well, I've done that and it hasn't worked. But yeah, did you really do it? Did you do it consecutively every fucking day, from the moment you woke up and the moment you went to bed? I'm not talking about the whole day. I'm talking about at least that for every day. Because I guarantee you, if you're telling me you did, there's probably at least 5, 8, 10 days out of there where you didn't do it. And you're going to say, oh, it probably still work. Well, no. If you didn't follow the instructions perfectly, then why would you just assume it doesn't work? Because you didn't do it properly. Were you told to do it a specific way? And if you didn't do it that specific way, you're going to blame that it didn't work? No. You didn't do it right. You know how I know? Because this is what I did. This is what I continuously do. I'll start something, and then I'll have a couple bad days, and I just won't do it. But you know what I do? I don't blame it. I don't say, oh, I'll just keep going like that never happened. I fucking start until I get it. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 times of me having to do it over and over again. But I have the dedication, the resilience, and I know that if you do it the way it was described to you, it's going to be done. Your brain watched that, it understood it, and it gave it guidelines to follow. So if you don't follow those guidelines, your brain, your subconscious mind will take the fucking out. It will say, well, no, you can blame magic all you want, but it's not the magic. You are the problem. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. It told you specifically for 30 days to focus on what you want. Take this out of your pocket twice a day and read it. Think about it with some emotion. Visualize it. And there was 5 days in there where you just didn't do that. 2 of them were together, another 2 of them were together, and 1 of them was just last week. So you can't keep going and say, oh, you already got 3 weeks done. You're on the last week now. It's about to happen. And expect me to do it for you. That's not the rules you gave me. You gave me these rules. You said these rules are going to make it, and then you broke these rules. So by contract law, by breaking these rules, I don't have to give you what we signed the contract for. It is now null and void. Sorry. Boom. Done. And this is why you've got to stick through it. If you read something and it tells you how to do it a specific way, you need to do it that specific way. Once you finish that and you want to try making your own, that's fine. If you make your own system and you say, this is what's going to bring you something, then you need to follow your own specific orders. And that will bring you that something because that's what you programmed in you. But if you're taking someone else's idea and you don't do it to the letter, well, yeah, it's not going to work. And I know I'm being kind of weird and vague, and it's just because my notebook's downstairs and I have to leave to go to the bird sanctuary for a walk with my family and all that because it's family day time. And I fucked up and thought I had an hour to speak, and I only have half an hour. So I know I'm not really talking about anything important, so I do apologize once again. But it is relevant. A lot of people like to blame the magic when their shit doesn't happen. You know, you might even be blaming me, like, well, Corey, I've been doing the recordings. Well, Corey, I've been writing the book. Well, Corey, I've been doing the affirmations. I've been doing the rituals and all that, and nothing's happening. Well, did you do them every day? Did you do them like I said? Did you put the recorder on every fucking night? Did you tape your affirmations? Did you do the sigils? You've done everything I said continuously, together, every day, at least once a day, if not more, then yeah. If it hasn't been a month yet, and then you just got to wait it out. And if it's been over a month, well, you fucked up somewhere. You forgot to do something because this shit works. It works for everybody. Everybody I know that does it, it works for. 100%. 110%. This shit works. So, if you did everything, if you actually did everything I told you to do, and it still doesn't work, the only thing I can tell you is that you either have programming in there or you don't believe in it. And the best way to get it to work, if you don't believe in it, is to just say, fucking, it didn't work, I give up. You have to really mean it, though, unfortunately. But once you proclaim it didn't work, magic's not real, fuck you, magic, kind of thing, then it will happen. Because then you have profound faith, or you've actually completely let it go out of your mind, stop thinking about it. You know, I guess I'm talking about the reasons magic fails, I guess. And even though I put on Fredo's video, I think, before, and I'm just basically going over that same thing in my head, because once again, it's my core knowledge. That's why I put this shit on. This shit's part of your core knowledge. You're going to think of this stuff now when people bring up things, and it's going to help you out, and your mind's going to go places for you through this process. And that's the only way I could tell you if you want to try to affirm if this is real, if you want to see if this stuff is real, is you have to meditate on it. You have to keep one of these ideas in your head and ask, hey, was great-tartaria real? And see what answer you get. And I'm not going to tell you my answer because I don't want to get mail or people pissed off at me or for whatever I say. But you got to meditate on it. But anyways, your core beliefs are what you're supposed to be identifying. That was one of the first videos I did. I want to say it's like lesson 5 I did whenever I only talked for 15 minutes. And I only had small sequences and I was talking way too low. So maybe you didn't hear it. But I actually went through like a fast little script saying, it's the same process of your whole birth certificate, right? Your birth certificate was signed by the hospital or by your parents, right? It wasn't signed by you. And this is why we can dispute it, because you didn't actually sign your birth certificate. Someone else did it for you. And you go in there and say, this is not my signature. I didn't sign for this, and I want my real live birth now. Or you say you're dead or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about today. I will have an episode on this. That's not what I'm talking about today. But the point is, it's a correspondence, and as above, so below. You're doing the same thing with the programming that's put in your head. Programming was put in your head by other people, by your family and all that. And you're basically saying, I do not approve of this programming. I do not accept this programming. So I want it null and void, and I want to put in my own fucking programming. And this is what I want to put in. But you can't do that if you're going to keep watching the fucking TV, or listening to bad music, or engaging in bad behavior, and being around people that promote this bad shit. You need to do this and start protecting your mind. You got to do the banishings every day. Go to your temple every day. Put your feet on the ground every day. Put on the recorder with the affirmations you want to become every day. Carving a candle once a day. If you can't do it once a day because of the money, once every second day, whatever. You want to live a little bit longer, you need to distinguish that every 2 days is like 1 day. That's a nice fucking programming you like to do. That's what I did. That's how I'm staying looking young. I programmed 48 hours 1 day in my life. I know that sounds crazy, but if your body, anyways, we'll get into that a different day as well. But let's see how much time I have left. I'm just going over some random crap here that I hope will help people out. I broke my fucking keyboard on my laptop the other day. It's pretty shitty. Only a couple things came off, but we got a new computer set up in the kitchen with the internet connection hooked right up to it, which is why my shit hasn't dropped quite a while now. Actually, it dropped yesterday. What the fuck am I talking about? I have a 5-hour episode, which turned out to be the same episode twice, but it is what it is. But yeah, so you're doing the same programming, and if your programming is not in line with what you're trying to do, meaning you have money programming that money's evil, or whatever the case is, it doesn't even have to be religious programming or that money's evil. It could be that you're programmed to never amount to nothing. You watch your parents live in poverty all their life. So you are programmed just through that. Not even your parents telling you anything. Your parents might have told you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want, but by seeing them always be impoverished, that programming with your mind, and now you're always going to be in poverty. That could be simply it. And if that is the case, then you need to break that and write affirmations saying, I am worth it, I am rich, I am wealthy, I am financially secure and wealthy, I financially make enough money that I can pay all my bills and have 50% of it left over. That's how much money I make. That's why you're not being specific, but you are being specific at the same time. I am so grateful and thankful that I have multiple incomes that are always increasing in quantities and quantities, or sorry, I said that twice, in quantities and in size or in amounts or whatever. You need to reprogram your mind. You need to remove that old programming. Start making affirmations that tear down that old one, or literally do what I said in that one episode, that you don't accept any of that programming. If you were one of those people that witnessed that, well, then you need to assume that was programmed in your mind, that you're supposed to be poor your whole life. All right, and then you need to write down that as many as you can remember, but specifically that one, and say, I don't agree, or this was programmed in me without my acceptance, without my, with my signature or whatever, however you want to word that. I worded it differently before and I can't think of it now. But that's what you need to do. You need to say that you don't accept that it was put there against your will. And that now, with your will, you're putting this in. And then you can only do things going forward that promote that. So you watch guys that have had success with magic. You watch rich fuckers teaching how to stay rich. You watch people teaching how to make money. And whatever way you want to make that money, whatever idea you have in your head, whatever you feel is something you want to do, then you watch things of that nature as your entertainment now on YouTube, on the internet, through blogs, through radio, whatever it is. If it's a race car fucking driver, then you're going to surround yourself with those guys and how-tos. If it's a baseball a star, you're going to surround yourself with how-to, or what the pros do, or how they train, or this and that. If you want to be a performer on stage, or someone who's a motivational speaker, well, you're going to watch those fucking guys at the same time as you're doing your magic and you're learning more about magic ritual, or if you want to be some crusader who fights for mankind, trying to fuck up the money system at the same time as you do magic to make more money or whatever. I don't know how that would work, but you're going to learn how to do this promissory notes and shit like that. So anyways, that's my little rant for today. I don't know how much time I have, being that I didn't really count this shit right. I think I'm at about 25 minutes already. I didn't really talk about much, but I do want to say here and now that I'm not going to put much more of this stuff on. maybe in a month or so, something will come up that I think is important that needs put on. But like I said, Santos kept coming up to me, and then from there it evolved to the money. I felt like I needed to put this on here, so I'm guessing there's somebody out there that just needs to know this stuff or needs to learn about this stuff, and they couldn't find the right stuff, or they were looking at the wrong stuff, so they needed to hear something I put on. And from there, I just kept evolving, and I found all these different ones. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give them all the fear-based stuff that I think is helpful fear-based media, but it's still fear-based media nonetheless. It's still stuff that you can get stuck on that isn't going to serve you. It has helpful insight, helpful knowledge, helpful ways to think, good ways to break down your programming that you may not know you already have. Maybe I still had some stuck in me. Maybe that's why I had put this on here. That could be 100% why. I don't really know. But, and I don't claim to know everything, you know. I feel like I'm in a pretty good position now, that I'm better than most, and I feel very grateful and lucky to be where I am right now and being able to enjoy